hard to imagine with the sheer cost of brand new vehicles that you can find engines that blow oil, transmissions that slip, as well as rear ends that literally blow out. Yes, in fact, I'm going to share this massive, comprehensive, extensively long list of some of the worst cars, trucks, SUVs that you can find on the market today, so you can go out there armed with the information to know which vehicles are absolute trash. Let's get into it now. Life's too short to drive boring cars. And right here we have a mid-size luxury car segment we want to talk about and lead it off naturally with a BMW. And here we have a 5 Series vehicle. Comes equipped with the 4.4 liter twin turbo V8, and while it makes an impressive amount of performance and goes and sounds great, and it has a lot of technology like the BMW laser, the glossy rims, and all kinds of other great little details, the fact remains is many BMWs come high in cost and service rates as well as reliability problems. Now we know what a lot of the problems are that come with BMWs. With that V8 happen to be the fact that they got the hot V. While later generations get slightly better, you get too much heat because it's a hot V. The turbos are packaged in the V and it just basically melts down the top of the engine. You wind up with excessive fuel consumption, burning wires, plastic fittings, and everything starts to either leak coolant, oil, timing chains potentially an issue, as well as battery draw seems to be a big problem. Window regulators and brakes seem to be weak on these vehicles too. So sadly, these BMW 5 Series, particularly with the V8 under the hood, are very problematic. So that just segues us right into the mid-size luxury car segment. The next engine that's horrible, that clearly you'll find in one of these. You'll find it in many other vehicles like Volkswagen Passats as well, but we're looking at the Audi A6, 97 to about 2005. And there's a series of turbo diesel engines, the 2.5 liter V6, lots of problems. Yeah, it had a lot of good performance, but it had a lot of negative attributes. And you could tell this older generation of Audi A6 just by simply looking at some of the headlights. You could tell that's the older generation, and this older generation here too. The grille, the headlights, clearly older style Audis. This one here has been rode hard, put away wet, and a little bit of crust around the edges. A vehicle that's seen some of its better days, but it's not about the exterior, it's not about the paint or the scratch or the rust or any of that. It's what you'll find in some of these vehicles like the Passat or this Audi A6, including the all-road, are some of the engine codes like AFB, AKN, AYN, BCZ, BDO, BFC, AKE, BAU, and BDH. That was a mouthful, but yes, you can also find them in Skodas. Like I said, within the VAG group, that engine was quite prevalent. Now, it had great performance, and it was actually quite economical, but there was an inherent issue, and some of it was contributory because the brand actually advised on extended oil service intervals, and that led to a catastrophic issue, which you'd find in a lot of these engines, preventing them from running all that long, and 50,000 miles would be a stretch, to say the least, which is ridiculous because most diesel engines are inherently designed and should be designed to run hundreds of thousands of miles, but not that one. One major issue that contributed to actually having to rebuild engines and them not lasting all that long are the camshafts would wear out way prematurely. The camshafts essentially are those that are connected to the ends of the valves and drive your valve train, allow fuel in, exhaust out, and those camshafts, the lobes would wear down, and then you'd find yourself with poor running conditions and situations where that vehicle just wouldn't run properly at all. Check engine lights and just a host of other issues. Other unfortunate problems with some of these are the thermostat that would actually plug off, and the thermostat's what opens and closes and allow the engine to evacuate heat or not. And sometimes the thermostat would jam up, you overheat that engine. Water pumps, another problem, they'd leak and they'd fail, as well as oil pumps. Turbochargers as well, a big problem. Turbochargers blow, you're dealing with a $3,000 or $4,000 repair. So whether it's turbos, water pumps, thermostats, even O2 sensors and leaks intake manifolds and like, there are way too many issues in that 2.5 liter turbo diesel engine even to assume that this thing will go any significant miles. There's the next mid-sized car you definitely want to avoid for 2025. We're talking about the Nissan Altima. As you'll notice, this one's all-wheel drive, but it has a lot of plastic parts, and I think that theme just continues on. The rear taillights look quite low grade, this looks lower grade, and although this is kind of a slick looking piece, the rest of the car just really lacks the luster of a lot of their competitors. You know, if you're looking for a car like this, you want a mid-size sedan, you definitely got to look at Honda. For the Accord, and you want to look at Toyota Camry, they're going to provide you a more reliable, more interesting drivetrain and driving experience, because the Altima like this has known for a whole pile of issues, from camshaft, crankshaft position sensors, intake gaskets, fuel pumps, catalytic converters that crumble, and of course cause all kinds of back pressure issues, electronic problems, and naturally the transmission that's found in almost every Nissan, including the Altima like this, contains the CVT, the continuously variable transmission, which Nissan's known for. Not a great product. It's not the most reliable vehicle, and that 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engine, although it's a little bit old school and conventional, the rest of the platform's simple and conventional too, but not in a good way. Sure, you get all this chrome here and chrome detail there, but there's not even a sunroof. And of course, sadly, this one here has had a few rough goes in it. Naturally, not a very well put together vehicle. And as you can see, just a good indication, we see plastic, fantastic almost everywhere. Suspension parts are not uncommon to fail prematurely, as are brakes are common issues as well with these vehicles. And leaks are abound in a lot of Nissan products, including this one is no different. As you can see, leaks starting to spew out just about everywhere here too. As mentioned, I know the mid-size sedan market is a hard one to find any products nowadays. The big three domestic manufacturers are giving them up. Ford went away with the Fusion, as well as Dodge went away with the 300 series vehicles. And now unfortunately GM has also but eliminated all their cars for 2024. So 2025 means your selection is fewer and far between, but definitely you want to look at other products from Toyota and Honda. They're going to be much more reliable than the Nissan Altima. Now the next one on our list is a slightly older version of what we're looking at right here in gray. The reason I'm not showing you the actual year is because they're very hard to find nowadays. They don't last. But let's take a quick look around and then I'll explain exactly what the problems are. Now these cars generally won't last, particularly the 09s and up, because of a lot of issues. But people love the Audi because of the Quattro all-wheel drive system, their legendary the four rings, and again, Quattro. Of course, the later versions have the LEDs, but the older versions still look sharp too. They had their own trademark headlights. Audi, it looks very, very slick. Of course, you'd go down the run here and you'll see they have these great lines up on the top. Of course, go around to the back, LEDs. This is a TFSI, of course. 1, 2 tailpipes, and very heavily carboned up, of course, in this A4. Now the interiors are very, very plush and literally some of the best in the business. And you do get the other amenities like sunroofs and all of the active safety features that you can possibly imagine in a modern day car. But the problem is there's a lot of issues with a lot of the 09s, 010s. For example, massive oil consumption to the point where you literally see it coming out of the tailpipe. Or the camshaft housing essentially leaking oil. We have carbon buildup because of the direct injected engine. That's a problem. We needs to be walnut blasted and cleaned every 60,000 miles. Oil leaks, coolant leaks. Of course, water pumps a big problem, and the intake manifolds are built in such a way that they're a pain and very expensive to change. Catalytic converters, very expensive, and they're known to go to, as does the high pressure fuel pump. And everybody knows how expensive high pressure fuel pumps can cost. $2,000 to $3,000, and the injectors themselves are also quite expensive. The suspension is a little fragile, and it's known to needing a rebuild at ridiculously low miles. And as well, there's check engine lights galore for different sensors, such as the oxygen sensor, which is one that carbons up as well and prematurely fails. So it's a problematic car, from gearbox to engine issues, oil consumption, and lots of electronics. It's a troublesome car, and because of the massive depreciation, likely most people will just figure out why keep pouring money down the money pit, send it to the dumpster. The first car that I personally owned a couple years ago, but I couldn't get rid of it fast enough because it had so many engine problems. It leaked, it rattled, and it just went boom. And that was the E92 BMW 335, similar as we have right parked behind me here. Now, many people would argue that BMW 3 Series are the epitome of performance sedans and sport coupes. And they have more than their share of styling accents. The beautiful angel eye headlights and the typical kidney-shaped grille. They definitely have a nice front spoiler that always accentuates the look. Nice alloy wheels. And they have typical functional and slightly sporty mirrors on all of their cars. Nice handles that wear well and never break off on front and back. And cycle around. They always have that great trademark tail lights. You can't mistake them. It's a BMW. And this one here, how you tell it's an E90 335 is it's got the dual exhaust, similar to the one I had, but mine was the coupe. Look! Right there we have a car that has a 300 horsepower turbo 6-cylinder engine. Well, this is the revised updated N55 engine. Mine was the N54, which is the twin turbo 6-cylinder engine. Made lots of power, but I couldn't drive that piece of junk for more than a week without having to lift up the hood to make a coolant leak repair or possibly fix an oil leak, or of course there's a whole host of other problems. Let's talk about a few of the issues I had. My N54 had wastegate rattle. It was starting to rattle, and when that starts, you know the end is near. You're gonna have to do wastegates or turbos. High pressure fuel pump was known. Actually, BMW had an extended warranty out for that because it was such a junk original part. Then the high pressure injectors were a common failure. Then the infamous oil filter housing right here on this side. It leaked oil, coolant, or just mixed. Pretty extensive job to fix that because there was one bolt fastening that to the engine that you actually had to remove the bulkhead, cross bracing, and half of the intake manifold to get at. Then also intake manifold O-rings were a weakness here, and you get boost leak or vacuum leaks. And I also had a water pump thermostat, which is buried underneath. You have to pull down steering rack and other undercarriage components just to get at. And the parts weren't cheap either. I had to pay about $600 all in for the parts. That's through a wholesale network. Get the dealer to do it, that's a $2,000 repair for the water pump and thermostat. These cars leaked like a sieve. Sure, they were fun to drive because the way they were balanced, the manual gearbox, they looked nice, everything was decent, except that damn engine. And I can only imagine if they put an equal amount of power into an electric motor under the hood, you wouldn't have all the leaks. You wouldn't have all the wastegate rattles and injector problems. You would just have a motor that just moved this thing down the road. And if you balance the weight appropriately, you could have a fun car that was a pocket rocket and exciting for years to come. The BMW 335, E90, and E92. Oh, we'll give you another one, and it's not the E350 from 2006 and 7. Those are flops. But let's actually talk about one that's a little more contemporary. For example, a vehicle just like this. We're looking at the 2015 and newer Mercedes-Benz C300. This one here has obviously the turbo 6-cylinder engine, but it's more importantly, it's the C300 that we're talking about here. Yeah, you've got great one-touch handles, and of course these beautiful LEDs, especially on the coupe. The coupe does look particularly striking. Of course, you do have a little wing on the back for some of these on the C43 AMG version with a set of quad pipes and all kinds of great vents and beautiful wheels. You do have the big sunroof on top. But that's not where the issues are with this vehicle. Some of the issues and reasons why this vehicle won't last all that long come right in here. So some of the issues that we've had on the inside, and you can pretty much guarantee you're going to experience on the inside of these vehicles, are glitches with the infotainment system, the MMI or HMI system as well. We had a speaker pop out of the door panel, very similar to the GLC, as this is a GLC interior, more or less, and the same problems apply. Okay, let's get out and let's check the outside. A problem that you would actually anticipate with these vehicles, why it's not all that reliable, is what's going on under the hood. Of course, we do have electric problems you would expect with some of these vehicles, but the big issue is that French-derived 2.0 liter turbo 4-cylinder engine. Yes, in fact, there's a lot of issues with that. Now, the transmission seems to be pretty stout at 9-speed auto. It does make 240 and change horsepower out of that 4-banger, but we've had some problems already. I would anticipate that some of the, as you hear on the forums, you're gonna hear more and more problems with people actually holding pistons. That's right. Pistons blowing a hole in the piston, and then you see black smoke coming out the back, and you see check engine lights and a lot of rattling and noise followed by an engine stopping. That's sadly is what some customers are going through, and some of it actually they say is related to poor fueling, or maybe NOx sensor management, or some kind of fuel injection system problem, or using too low a grade of fuel. But nonetheless, that seems to be an issue that's tying up the reliability of these cars. And that literally will be one of the showstoppers for a lot of these C300s. Most domestic products like Ford and GM, they've pretty much all but given up on all of their vehicles in the car segments in general. So when we're talking about luxury cars, most of them tend to be coming from Europe, because even Japan does not have a whole ton of full-size large luxury SUVs and cars. But in this case, we have a Jaguar XJL, absolutely one of the best looking vehicles, but I promise you, timing chains, coolant leaks, as well as a whole host of electrical problems means that almost any of these older Jaguars with the full suite of electrical features and technology means that you're guaranteed to be buried in repairs and catastrophic failures. So that just takes us into the list of some of the worst full-size luxury cars that are absolute trash. Okay, here's the next one that's literally a disaster. Have you ever ABC? Yeah, active body control. Are your wallets ready for that one? Of course, we have the W221 edition, which is essentially 2007 in North America, 2006 across the globe to about 2013. The S-Class came in a series of different vehicles with gas jobbies of different capacities, AMG versions, diesel versions, depends on what part of the globe you're from, but it had a lot of different options and a lot of technology buried under that skin there. It is just a nightmare. Beautiful when it was new, but let me tell you one thing. This is the epitome of overly complex luxury vehicle that becomes a ruthless money pit. Before we get into some of the mechanical issues, we look at some of the fit and finish problems. These tend to come off. They're kind of flimsy. This isn't a well-made vehicle overall. As a matter of fact, it also was very prone to getting rust in areas like that, getting prone to rust along the door panels. You'd get rust down in this area here. And of course, you could potentially get rust on this trailing edge of this trunk lid here. Oh, there it is. See? The rust there and the rust along that trim. But you can tell this model from the other ones in this awkward looking taillight assembly, almost what the Bangle button BMW is doing in similar generation. What we have here are these flares. Now this looks sort of interesting, and they have very great little handles in there. But the interior wasn't all that well put together, and a lot of that failed as well. Sure, sunroof, that's the least of your concerns if that fails. One of the big issues here was the automatic transmission. If you happen to be rocking the old 7G automatic transmission in this unit, you're likely going to have problems with the transmission control unit, the TCU, with the conductor plate and its valve body. Some problems with the transmission can basically cause jerking, driving, all kinds of hesitation, and go into limp mode. And to fix or replace that TCU was an exercise in futility, or you literally didn't care about money because it was going to cost you an arm and 3 legs. Now, fortunately, if you still run one of these units, you probably are aware that there's aftermarket opportunities to fix it. You can take it to a little electronics store, and some of those wizards now can fix that up for you. Then under the hood of the gas jobbies, like this one here is an S550, we're talking about gas engine specifically, there is a plastic variable valve intake manifold actuator that's associated with that. Also what BMW is doing in their S85 engines and the S65 engines, where they have those plastic gears in the intake manifold and they would shear off and then you go into limp mode. That's also big dollars, and it's going to be quite extensive to fix. Usually results in a check engine light and catastrophic dollar and wallet emptying. You also could get excessive buildup in the PCV due to carbon, and the direct injected engines were a big issue. You could expect or anticipate oil leaks as well from the cam. On the heads, you can get a camshaft issue with the plastic cam plugs that essentially would puke oil out all over the place, and you basically have this sitting in your driveway every single day. Then, as I mentioned, the active body control unit, also tied in with the ECU and a whole host of different sensors and actuators, usually meant a massive, severe second or third mortgage just to get that vehicle turned around and getting it dialed in and working properly again. Hugely expensive car to repair, hugely complex, doesn't hold up structurally very well. The interior isn't shakes, rattle, and roll. Transmission engine failures, that's why you really don't see many of these around anymore. The S550 in the W221. And these cars here are an absolute beautiful masterpiece. Very, very wonderful looking car. The design, you've got the fastback look. And of course, this is the base version of what you'd have the RS7, which is what I'd consider one of the best sports sedans today. However, it doesn't come without problems. These A7s, for example, are rated based on RepairPal as a 2.0 out of 5, which is far below average reliability as per RepairPal. They rate these vehicles costing an average of about $1,251 per year, when the typical average luxury vehicle is only around $970, versus as well the $652 for an average vehicle in industry. So these vehicles do not lack in performance, styling, handling. That's not their weak point. The weak point really there's a few things that you have to take note. These here are very common. There's been cases and reported where these actually shatter at the drop of a hat. You'd be driving along and your panoramic sunroof just shatters, scaring the passenger inside. There's another problem with these cars. You go to hit the throttle because you want to take off, you have a green light ahead, and lo and behold, they have what they call throttle lag. In other words, you put your foot, stab the throttle, and the car either hesitates, delays for 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds sometimes, to the point where it's actually dangerous now to enter oncoming traffic if you want to make a left-hand turn. So that throttle lag has been a known issue with these cars. Now, there's been a few other electric-related gremlins as well with these vehicles. For example, the speedometer being that it's digital now, has been known to go out or go completely blank. Like it'll basically just black right out on you at the drop of a hat. As well as the backup camera, which of course you can see down underneath here, has been known to actually go blank on you to the point where it'll either stay on or it won't work at all when you engage it from the inside, and you need it to actually back up. So there's been a lot of electrical related gremlins, again, sunroof and the throttle delay issues. Great car, but there's too many risks and big dollar repairs associated with these cars. The next Benz is not all that reliable, and there's already been some problems out of the gate. Clearly, some of the issues are actually design, some of them are programming, and some of them are just overly technologically advanced, meaning that there's just too much going on and likely going to be a big problem in the near future. Sure, you don't have oil leaks, cam plug issues, you don't have coolant problems, but you're gonna have a whole new set of problems that you're gonna find with this particular Mercedes right here. And yes, there's already some recalls on this particular vehicle. Of course, what we're looking at here is an interesting looking little unit right there. We're talking about the EQE 500 right here. Of course, you get the backup camera. That has been known to be a problem. This is a 4MATIC, but that's because pretty much electric motors are driving all wheels, so it's a little bit different. Doesn't have your conventional drive shaft there. Of course, here you have some great tech going on there, but there's more to go wrong. Electric handle pop out, electric mirrors, electric everything on this vehicle. And when electrics and too much technology come together in one package, you often have issues. Of course, some problems with headlights failing to function. Of course, some people comment that these vehicles sit too low, and that's likely going to be a problem for speed bumps, humps, potholes, and you're going to end up damaging the carriage underneath. But that's not where it begins and ends. Look through the back right here. That little rear window in the back is literally barely a porthole, and seeing out there could pose a potential hazard for drivers. But then in the front, you have issues already with the steering. Where the steering needed reprogramming, the steering has had numerous issues and complaints by the customers. We also have problems with the brakes. Of course, right there, you can see them tucked underneath there. The brakes have been an issue, and some of it is because of the dynamic regeneration in the braking system. Both needs reprogramming, and as well, people have commented that when you go to put your foot down, the brake pedal isn't totally where you expect it to be, simply because as you let off the gas, the brakes automatically kick in to regenerate power back into the batteries, and while you're doing that, you often wind up with a situation that's actually dangerous to the driver. There's also been comments about ergonomics and the way the display is actually situated so high, it actually puts the steering wheel and the driver display in an awkward position where you can't barely see over it and you can't see your display. Other than that, a lot of this is ergonomics, but it also been ranked as Consumers Report's least reliable luxury EV in the market today. Mercedes and Tesla are literally swapping punches for the least reliable packaging in the electrical vehicle market. So I have to believe that time will tell, but clearly already with some of the bugs and the problems and the complaints, that this is one of Mercedes-Benz least reliable vehicles. And we have now the growing in proportion the Honda Civic, as well as cars like the Volkswagen Golf. Now the Civic, some of these with the 1.5 liter turbo 4 have suffered with oil and fuel dilution issues. Their CVT transmission in modern Hondas leaves a lot to be desired for reliability, and Volkswagens with a lot of their engines are truly problematic and failure prone, with the EA 888 engines, with timing chain problems, oil consumption, water coolant problems, you name it, it's no shortage of problems, electrification problems. And in this particular model, which we have the R version, of course carries the DCT or the double clutch gearbox, has also been known to be problematic with some miles. In short order, they're good. In short miles and with a high amount of maintenance, they can be fine. But the problem is they're very problematic, expensive to maintain, and the bottom line is both of these vehicles, while they're both great, neither of them are amazing. So let's get into the conversation about some of the worst small cars that you can buy today. And another one is the engine that's tucked in this beautiful little car. And when I say beautiful, I mean it. They're fun, they're great looking vehicles, and with the right engine, they can be a blast as well as the right transmission. But unfortunately, there is an engine configuration you want to avoid like the plague. But let's take a look. And I'll show you, even this one here, I saw it being towed in the other day, and I'll show you something why I'm just confirmed in saying what I'm saying. I mean, clearly this is a Mini, which is also built by effectively BMW, but the engine in that, under that hood, is a collaboration between BMW, Peugeot, and Citroën. That's right, this one obviously was towed in there. Beautiful headlights. Look at the plastic finish on there. This is Baker Street style in the house. Obviously, look at those great little retro mirrors and lots of sun coming in through the massive sunroof right there. Hot little exhaust tip there, and look at these beautiful wheels. Absolutely gorgeous little car. Retro styling all the way around. But look what I found on this vehicle. They literally say do not start the engine, probably because there's something catastrophic about to happen there, or just did. So the engine I'm talking about is the 1.6 liter, they call it the Prince engine. And it started from back at about 2006 till present. And it literally has problems galore. Now, again, as I say, there's engines that you'd probably want to ramp up to. This isn't necessarily one of them. Fuel system related issues as well as poor running can contribute to this car's problematic areas. And other issues are the timing chain that coordinates the timing of the valves and the pistons can actually slack off and become loose with time. And when that happens, you basically got a condition where the vehicle runs poorly, sloppy, and you never quite really know why, and you end up chasing problems like fuel injectors and spark, but yet it relates more to timing that's off that far. EGR valves, exhaust gas recirculation, is a problem with almost every model, diesel or gas, as well as the fuel injectors are known to have bad seals that let fuel fumes waft into the engine and even into the cabin, which makes it very uncomfortable, annoying, and potentially dangerous. Right, if you have open fuel, open flame all mixing together, it sounds like a recipe for a disaster. So clearly not a great situation. If you need to have one of these vehicles, go with the turbocharged 4-cylinder, a Cooper S. Some of the later generations past 2014 stick with maybe a 15 or newer model year, and you could get yourself in a fun, frivolous little driving experience in the BMW Cooper. And just when you thought you found a fun-loving little car, we have the Fiat 500. Absolutely great and fun to drive for a little while anyway. I mean, who wouldn't like to rip around in this? I mean, with today's day and age, with the fuel costs the way they are, it's guaranteed to be cheap on fuel to run. Great for parking downtown. If you have a lot of tight parking accommodations, you can almost double park these vehicles without too much trouble. And they are quite cool looking. Look at those great taillights. How about that 500? That looks sharp on this little Fiat. Love the way they look. It's actually a cute little car. Little carboned up tailpipe there, and those great wheels right there. Chrome looking little handle, and a cutesy retro looking little mirror on there. How about the little bug eyes on the front? Pretty cute little unit. Clearly the paint doesn't last very well, and neither does the interior. And look, we have an automatic, so that could be a problem as well. So as cute and perky as these vehicles are, they have their host of issues, and they won't last very long. They're just not built to do that. As much as we wish this would go 152, 300,000 miles, not a chance. Won't even make 100, but here's why. Front ends get clunky and bangy. That gets costly to fix. It is an Italian car, as well as steering. That is also a problem. Starts to get grinding and clunking in the steering, inconsistent feel. How about if you get the auto? Bad news. Stick with the manual, but the manual's not safe either, because the manual, the clutch springs crack and split. There's issues in the clutch itself, and it becomes a very expensive proposition to start replacing clutches in these particular cars as well. Of course, you have coolant issues, wear and tear problems, and a lot of the hardware within the interior just does not hold up with any significant amount of time. Now that in itself isn't particularly costly and going to limit the vehicle to 100,000, but it's all of the nickel and dime repair issues that you're going to expect with these Fiats. They just won't last. The engines are weak, the transmissions are weaker, they leak, they break, and most people that are going to buy these just won't be able to keep up with the repairs or want to keep pouring money down that money pit. Sorry, Fiat 500, great try. Not quite. The first one on our list is a compact car. What we're looking at here is a product from the VAG group. Here's a Volkswagen Jetta. Unfortunately, even it's got some great details. You've got the LED lights, you've got some beautiful chrome detail on the bottom, but there's no exhaust tips anywhere. There's all kinds of fake going on here, and sadly, Volkswagen has been struggling with quality control challenges. Of course, you get great details like the door handles and big panoramic glass and laser cut rims, but what happens when stuff gets real and you've got issues under the hood? Because in fact, yes, there's been problems already with creaking, of course, throughout, talking about loose controls on the HVAC controls. People are talking about tops of strut noises and other problems like the clock spring issue. You get clicking noises in the steering wheel as you turn it from side to side. Really shouldn't happen. Squeaking in the interior. And even more importantly, the engine itself has been known already to blow head gaskets. That's right, no brand new vehicle should be blowing head gaskets, but according to 2024 results, and 25 looks to be much the same, transmissions are somewhat problematic, as are many electrical gremlins. There's also been many customers complain about the brakes, whether it's the back or even the front, only lasting as much as 20,000 miles. The vehicle is clearly not built up to task. One of the worst vehicles you can possibly buy for 2025, and definitely if you're looking for something more robust, Toyota Honda definitely has you answered. And the next little hot rod is this unit parked right behind me here, and considering it's built in Japan, you would think that it would be less problematic, but these definitely come with a lot of issues, specifically the 2012 to 2015 model years, even more so. But a lot of these in general have a lot of issues, specifically with the 2 and 2.5 liter 4-cylinder engines that a lot of them come with. But let's get into some of the troubles. Some of these vehicles, of course, you have oil leaking out of the rear of the engine. Baffles, that was a bit of a fix for it, but again, cost you some money to get that sorted out. Of course, premature brake wear, right there, they just don't last all that long. Chatter on the manual gearbox cars. So the cars that are equipped with the gearboxes like we see down here, the old stick shift, often have issues related to chatter, especially when the gearbox is cold or the clutch is cold. Check engine lights for a variety of different reasons. Many different oil leaks that you're finding with a lot of these older Imprezas. And while a lot of cars tend to leak oil, this one is particularly bad for that. But where the real big issues are with these 2 and 2.5 liter engines is that the heavy oil consumption. As a matter of fact, there was a class action lawsuit to address some of those issues in the slightly older generations of the Subaru Impreza. Now, of course, the latest generations also have the CVT transmission if you're going for the automatic, and those are chock full of issues as well if you're dealing with the continuously variable transmission. Lots of noise, lots of problems, lots of expense. Quite frankly, if you want something Japanese, I would stick more likely with a Toyota product. The next one on the list is this little unit, and it's a Chevy. What is it? A Sonic? Yeah, and it's the LT version. So these vehicles started about $17,000. They no longer make them. They were last produced in October of 2020, so you'll probably still find some 2021 model year vehicles around here. And at 17 grand, it seemed like a great deal, but let's take a look first and I'll explain some of the issues. Basic cheap looking tail lights, of course, in this Chevy. Very similar to the Cruze, slightly smaller. Of course, you do get alloy wheels, which looks like a nice fringe benefit. Simple, cheap little handles, almost looks like a Honda Civic. Of course, we have a little basic mirror, looks like the Civic as well. Yeah, great headlights on there of this little Chevy. And what kind of problems would you anticipate with this vehicle? From engine to transmission to electrics, how about cooling system leaks? Yeah, engine oil leaks. Check engine lights that can't be found, and it costs thousands of dollars trying to diagnose some of the issues. Just means even as little as 30,000 miles, you might find some minor problems or a major. If it's a major, you're talking up to $3,500 to $4,000 to fix that transmission issue. It might mean sluggish acceleration, delayed shifting, hard shifting, no shifting at all, and that is clearly an issue. Of course, there's also transmission failure from the turbine shaft fracture. Of course, 2014 is the worst, and that's going to cost you some big dollars. We also can't forget about the random stalling or the fail to start. These are clearly a dud in every capacity. So even at a meager $17,000, what appears to be good value, it's definitely not value add, and it's one that is basically throwaway and not worth the trouble. Well, the next piece of junk on the list that you won't make 100,000 miles, and it doesn't matter how good of a mechanic you really are, it's this Chevy Cruze here. Yes, a whole plethora of issues, but let's give you a quick walk around and show you the poor quality control that you can expect even on the outside of the vehicle. Let's look. Clearly they rust, they don't last very long that way. Be sure they got nice little chrome tips on them, but there's no sunroof on there. Pretty basic looking wheels, old school looking taillights on these vehicles for sure for the Chevy, and this is actually the Premier. Looking down there, nothing too exciting or extravagant. And the interior does look fairly modern, but it actually doesn't wear up all that well too to hard use and abuse. They do have some interesting headlights, I will add. Of course, and they do have sort of an aggressive looking stance right there. But what's the problem with these things? Well, other than the fact lots of coolant leaks, you can almost expect guaranteed to be topping up coolant. $10 a jug, guaranteed. Water pump's a problem. But the big thing is, do you know there's some cracked piston issues that have been evolving with some of these Cruzes? Absolutely terrible. As well as a transmission, harsh to shift, sometimes jerking, sometimes surging, and sometimes slipping altogether. Yes, catastrophic transmission failures through and through. These are literally some of the worst vehicles GM has ever produced, and I even rented one a few years ago in Vegas when I was on vacation, and over the week it felt like the vehicle was losing power every single day I drove it. It seemed like it was down on power, down on power. Opened the door and it dropped a quarter inch, just poorly built. There we are, we have this beautiful car here, obviously going for the retro look. 100% we've got the headlights, the bug-eyed looks for sure by this Volkswagen, and they have a great interesting front spoiler and a very retro looking hubcap. What about these little mirrors? Beautiful. And the running boards there look sharp as well. And of course we flare out here at the back. Very retro, consistent with the Volkswagen Beetle from back in the day. Semi-modern taillights. And a small simplistic handle consistent with the rest of the brand. The interior is even going for a slightly retro look as well. So overall, it's a beautiful car all the way around. Could you imagine with that convertible top down and the sun shining? And instead of hearing that engine rattling, wouldn't it be much nicer just to hear the whistling of the air through your ears with that roof down on a sunny Sunday afternoon? Maybe find your favorite back roads, because the engine that you'll find under the hood of these vehicles are often very problematic. You want a few examples? Let's start at the front, because the engine's not at the back anymore like the old original Beetle. Now it's at the front, but these engines are full of problems. Number one is valve cover gasket leaks. That's a problem. Leaks as well as smoke, possibly down the exhaust manifold. And nothing's more embarrassing than sitting in traffic in the hot summer and you see smoke coming from underneath the hood. There's also check engine lights, which are common, and more importantly, overheating is a very, very common problem with some of these engines. But get past all of that nonsense, we won't even talk about the electrics and some of the other module problems with these vehicles. The big one is engine rattle. Sometimes you get a difficulty starting, and often you get a rattling noise from under the hood. So what is that rattling noise? It's called the timing chain. And when the timing chain starts rattling, that's an indication that the chain is too loose, often because of low oil pressure, or certainly because of timing chain ramps and hardware. If that timing chain actually skips a cog or two, you wind up with a catastrophic engine failure. And why is that? Well, simply because piston, valve, connection, game over. So while it's a beautiful car, very cool, very stylish, and even better with the convertible than the coupe, one really can't help wonder how much better this car could be if you could plug it in and drive away without an ounce of a problem. The Volkswagen Beetle Cabrio. And the next category we have are sporty vehicles. Here we have the Mustang GT. This comes either with a manual transmission or automatic. This one here is a manual in this particular car. And we know there's recalls for these vehicles. Under the hood, you can get an issue with the clutch master cylinder. The system can actually blow a leak and become a fire hazard. With that hydraulic fluid that leaks onto the exhaust manifold, it could potentially lead to a fire, allegedly. And there's many other recalls, as this one's a Ford, and we know Ford is the current king of recalls. On top of this Ford Mustang, which actually has some of the better engines available in the Ford arsenal, the bottom line is no Ford is ultimately safe from a durability, reliability standpoint. So let's dive right in and look at some sporty cars that are absolute junk. Right here, we have a Mazda RX-8, and in fact it does. It has a twin rotor, multi-port fuel injection called a 13B Renesis engine. Yeah, it's a twin rotor engine. It has these two three-sided rotors that spin out of sync, and of course they have these little seals. They call them the apex seals, and those are common known issues. Now, the Mazdas have always created a very unique effect with some of those RX-7s and RX-8s. I personally owned an 88 back in the day, and they rev to the moon. They're fun to drive. They whistle along like a vacuum cleaner, and if you pull the rev limiter, you can get up to 17,000, 18,000 RPM without them blowing a gasket. However, these ones are not quite the same level of durability, and there's problems with that Renesis engine. Of course, you don't see these many around anymore because they don't last all that long. It's beautiful. There's the old Mazda logo. Of course, they have these beautiful high beams right there blasting away, and a pretty interesting front grille. I love these fender flares that you'll find on here, and they have that little grille and a tiny little mirrors. How about those suicide doors that flip this way instead of that way? Of course, look at that, gas cap, quite nice, and an aftermarket looking style of taillights here on this Mazda RX-8 right here. It's a beautiful looking car, and it's too bad that they didn't extend and further develop this chassis and design with a better engine. Yeah, you have sunroof there, and you have a pretty cool interior with a manual gearbox, which is a dying breed these days, but it's that Renesis engine which is going to eat your lunch. So what kind of problems would you expect? Extended warranty insurance companies have gone out and said that this engine has far exceeded almost any other engine on the market for lacking reliability and the fact that you have to replace it. 60,000 miles is a stretch. Good luck you even trying to get there with one of these engines. Yeah, you can get other issues like catalytic converter failures, which plug off and reduce that back pressure or increase the back pressure so the engine won't start properly. Starter issues you can anticipate as well. Power steering problems, not directly engine, but lots of issues with that, as well as the shifter knobs. But ignition coils are one of the big problems. You'll eat those like lunch. The engine floods very easily as well, partially because it may not get ignition or spark properly, and then it winds up just flooding the engine. pouring out and washing away the cylinder compression spaces. Those infamous apex seals already mentioned, they wear out way too prematurely. And once they wear out, then you reduce the compression, you start washing the cylinders, and it becomes a vicious cycle of catastrophes, one leading to the next, and it just cascades from there. The simple fact is the Renesas engine does not last over 60,000 miles, and good luck if you get one that does. Wow, you're a better guy than me. Twin rotor 13B Renesas engine, for the loss. A 2007, 2008, possibly W204 chassis design is what we're looking at right here. Yes, it's a Mercedes C-Class, and yes, it carries a wonderful V8 that a lot of people loved and we're highly anticipating. Let's take a quick look and kind of get to the point of why these vehicles are highly unreliable. Firstly, fit and finish was a problem. We had broken plastic parts there. The headlight washers didn't always work properly. We had fit and finish issues there, as well as there's a lot of components on the body panels that tend to pop off or come loose and just generally didn't hold up all that well as a whole. Now, this is a beautiful vehicle. It's an AMG, and yes, it does carry a set of quad exhaust tips on the C63 version here is what we're talking about. It's a very basic interior. The interior was relatively modest, but some of the buttons didn't hold up very well either. But junk plastic and poor buttons don't necessarily relegate it to negative duty in terms of reliability. It's actually based on the engine and the drivetrain, what's under the hood. Now, it was a 6.2 liter V8, naturally aspirated, relatively high revving, had huge capacity, and was just a beast, made some of the best exhaust barks in the industry as a whole. And that's why enthusiasts really love these cars. Rear-wheel drive, huge power, big V8. What's not to love about that? But there's a few issues. One big issue was the M156. We had the head bolt issue. You could get a whole series of problems, from leaking head gaskets, of course the head's shifting on the engine, and that's not a good scene. When that starts to happen, everything shuffles and moves out of alignment. You had clicking noises sometimes when you start the key. You also had potentially topping up of oil antifreeze. You had mixing because now all of a sudden you had some coolant winding up in the oil. And a lot of this came down to a simple fact that the head bolts that were actually holding and sandwiching the heads to the case of the engine were actually starting to corrode. They corrode, then they start to slacken off or they break, and then the heads start to shuffle around on there, and then you have all kinds of problems. You have the gaskets, you have bent rods as a result, mixing, lots of problems. That was one of the big issues. You also had camshafts and lifter issues where sometimes you get that start and you might have a soft, weak lifter that actually would drain down or bleed down, and you would actually get that initial rattling noise on startup. Of course, the cam lobes would prematurely wear. There was a lubrication issue with that, and of course, as cam lobes wear, you start to lose performance of the engine and outright catastrophic failure sometimes. The one thing, if you did have one of these cars, you need to have it. The big key thing is making sure that that clicking or that rattling noise would dissipate and actually go away within the first minute or so. If it's instead to continue to rattle on for minutes after, there's probably going to be a bigger issue. Also, frequent oil changes were very, very important. Another key issue is the cabin air filter. There was lots of issues with some of these cars stinking up a storm. You know that smell when you have dirty feet like that and it just smells rotten? Yeah, that's what's going on. A lot of people complain to that. Now, that's not reliability, but again, as well, duly noted. The engine, as great as it is, definitely has its share of problems. And the next one actually pains me to say this because there's a lot of BMWs that aren't very reliable, and this one's no exception, but this one is actually really fun to drive and is actually worth keeping, just like the E60 M5. What we have here is the E92 M3 right here. Beautiful car. There we have an E92 M3. That implies that it's the two-door version because it's the E92. And this particular model is a 2009. Absolutely beautiful. What we have is a hard top that retracts on this M3. Beautiful mirrors. Hard top that pulls back. You can see the seams in it. Flips down into the trunk space here. Great taillights on this BMW M3. And 4 chips on that particular exhaust system on this car. They also have these amazing rocker panels that slide all the way up there. They flare out to the hood that actually has this bulge in it, and as well as those 2 flaring nostrils. Absolutely aggressive looking car. You'll notice because it's an M3, it has the flares on the front. Beautiful car in many aspects. Right here, we've got that beautiful mirror. Look how it connects at the top. And these wheels are awesome as well. What about the interior? Well, these interiors in BMW generally wear very, very well. We have a light colored interior and it actually doesn't look that bad. You'll notice the shifter on the console would imply that this is a DCT, double clutch transmission, and some of the earlier generations within the BMW world. Find a good one of these and they're more or less a keeper. If you like performance cars and you just want to rip around for the weekend, great. But they won't make 100,000 miles and here's why. Well, this is a 4-liter V8. It's naturally aspirated, it's high revving, absolutely amazing car to drive. But with that S65 V8 engine is the same as the S85 and the V10 engine of the M5, and that's tight rod bearings, poor oiling, high revving engine makes for a bad combination. And what you end up with, throttle actuators that fail, and they're about $2,500 a piece, and they're very difficult to get at. They're below the intake plenum. And more importantly, you actually have to pull subframe, and it's a lot of extensive work to get underneath of this car to replace all the bottom end rod bearings, because that is your failure point. Anywhere from about 40 to 70,000 miles, you can expect to change rod bearings. Essentially, the bottom end of your engine is worn out. It's a great car, but unfortunately, it's for those that love the car and they need to have it, but it's not going to last 100,000 miles. And then there's the next car that I really wish that they converted to electric. Oh, wait a minute. That's a Porsche Boxster, and if memory serves me correct, wait a minute. They're in the process right now of generating the next 718, which is supposed to be pure electric. Wow, I think Porsche realized something. But it's the early Porsche Boxster. They were fun in the time, they're well balanced, so they drive like they're on rails, and they even look pretty good too. But let's take a look around and then explain. There's a Porsche Boxster. This one happens to be the S model, 6-speed manual gearbox, 3.2 liter. The base model was a 2.7 liter in the day. Of course, they have these beautiful kidney headlights, just kidding. And they have the wonderful front bumper, which is very, very consistent with the Porsche 996 911 of the same generation. That whole front clip was essentially the same car. But you do have a convertible. It's a roadster, so it's 2 seats only. But they did have a very attractive look. They've got that nice hump on the front and then the flare at the back. Just look down the side. It is a very attractive car. You've got that quarter vent there. And you've got these great little tail lights here. Of course, as I said, it's a Porsche Boxster S. And it's a very attractive mid-engine solution for a Porsche 911. But the problem was, too many people bought these with the Tiptronic, which is a sloppy automatic, not really the greatest, most engaging driving experience. You could get the manual, which is how most of them were outfitted. That's the way to go. But the problem was not with the transmission as much as it was with the engines. The earlier generations had you probably heard the intermediate shaft bearing problem. If you let it go, the engine basically went kaboom. You had shrapnel throughout the oiling system and then basically took out your engine. We also can't forget that the base engine only had 200 horsepower. It was actually down from the outgoing 944 turbo that it replaced. Not really all that exciting news. It was really more about the design, mid-engine, all of that. But could you imagine if you got rid of the IMS problems, got rid of the underpowered engine issues, and had pure electric tucked in the bonnet there? That would be a true win because you're not giving any of the mechanicals up anyway. Those are the very reasons that these cars are almost throwaway and very few people want them, and the values are very low. And the next popular segment is the pickup truck segment. Like we're looking at here, a Ford, we have an XTR 4x4, and Ford has had more than their share of issues. We'll talk about some of the key pickup trucks. Now Ford, you heard about the 2014 with the transmission suddenly shifting down to first gear while you're driving at speed, catastrophic failure because of some pinouts that were corroding in the transmission, causing a major recall. Of course, the back hub differential would break loose as well as allow the vehicle to roll away. That happened on certain models. And a lot of the modern day Fords with their twin turbo V6 engines, dropping valves on the 2.7s, the 3-liter engines, because the heads would fall off in the combustion chamber on the intake valves, as well as the cam phaser problems and the tick that they have. And of course, unfortunately, the Tundra in the Toyota isn't even that reliable these days, with the 3.4-liter twin-turbo V6 is catastrophically failing. Now, it sounds like Toyota's replacing engines on their cost, but at the end of the day, people have lost trust in that. The older 5.7 has been reliable, as was the older Tacoma, but the Tacoma now, in the new 8-speed, is failing as well. So Toyota is struggling right now with some of the pickup trucks, as is GM, Chevy. Of course, their light-duty trucks with the 5.3s, the cylinder deactivation, the 6.2s are all causing all kinds of problems with carbon fouling, and the lifter issues with some of these vehicles are causing many of these engines to fail. and the manufacturers are replacing either a head or two heads before they're likely to replace the entire engine. But even GM is struggling. They've also struggled with some of the 8-speed automatic transmissions, and now the latest 10-speed has caused some grief too. And naturally, what would truck discussion be if we didn't include a Ram? Well, we have a Cummins full-size 1-ton diesel truck. Unfortunately, it's the half-ton we're talking about to compare with the other ones, and they're sadly going through a host of issues too, with lifter ticks and all kinds of noise because of a lack of lubrication on the top end on some of their 5.7 Hemis. Their older 4.7s are poorly made as well, and sadly, even with cracked exhaust manifolds, a host of tip-em issues, these Rams are problematic. Now, unfortunately, the latest Ram is moving to a twin-turbo 6-cylinder engine called the Hurricane engine, and we would only anticipate even more problems as the vehicles increase in complexity. So even Ram isn't outside of the woods, and all of these major truck manufacturers are all struggling with reliability. And if you're looking for trucks, there's some great options out there, but the new Ram isn't necessarily one of them. Unfortunately, for those die-hard lovers of the fan and Mopar products, they've lost their V8s. So 2025, which is the older outgoing generation that we're looking at right here, as you can see right here, this is a 2021 model year. The bottom line is the version you're going to be looking at for 2025 is going to have a totally different engine. It's called a Hurricane engine. It's coming featuring a different state of tune, and depending on the model, it's called a Hurricane for a reason. It's a whirlwind of catastrophic failures, in my own personal opinion. Time will tell, but when we're dealing with Stellantis and new technology, we know we're in for a bumpy ride. And with these Rams, we're only going to get a straight 6 twin turbo engine that's producing significant performance levels, and the numbers that it's going to throw down are certainly quite impressive. The first rule of thumb, never buy the remake model the first model year of any major overhaul, which the Hurricane will be in 2025. And second, Stellantis usually takes 5 to 10 years to figure out how to build an engine reliably, at least based on my personal experience. And so while Rams produce some of the best looking trucks on the market, they definitely give you the big grills, and they give you the very strong looking, in this case you get the nostrils. This one's the Hemi E-Torque 1500, but we know that Hemi is going bye-bye. Unfortunately, even with all of these good looks, and I will say Ram has some of the nicest interiors of the pickup trucks on the market today, the fact remains is it's way too much of a long shot right now, and it's an absolute huge risk on buying a total overhaul to the Ram brand for 2025. Now Rivian, the R1T for example, is their pickup truck version, and people are considering getting on board with Rivian as it's an all-electric EV. Not everybody wants a Tesla Cybertruck. This is a great alternative, but the R1T, because it's an up-and-comer, does not come without some problems, and problems there are. There's been lots of customers complaining about service issues, taking the vehicle into the dealership, 1 step forward to fix a problem, 2 steps back, you have a new problem. There's been complaints where the tonneau cover actually does not seal properly. When you're closing it, there's clunking, strange noises, quality problems, water ingress, and then it ends up rusting out your spare wheel. So big problems there, as well as some of your driver assistance programs have been a big problem. A lot of it gets glared out in bright sunlight, and all of a sudden some of those systems deactivate. And as well, there's been problems with their audio system and the infotainment not putting volume out. It shows on the screen that it's working, but in reality there's no audio. So the R1T is one of those vehicles that's an up-and-comer, and because it's a starter company, you would expect some issues. Surprisingly enough, it's not the worst vehicle on Consumers Reports list, but in fact it is a problem. And the Rivian R1T is sadly one of those that makes a list of the most unreliable car brands. And we have from 1997 to 2010, you have a V8 engine here. And this V8 engine is actually 5.4 liter by varied displacement. As you can see right here, this is the Triton V8. That is one of the worst engines in Ford's history. It has a 3-valve configuration on this engine and has been a problem that's not repairable. And these engines just keep going on, failure after failure, and you have to replace engines or rebuild them to the tune of $7,000 or $8,000 every single time, and you can never make it right. All you can do is fix it, wait it out, and you'll fix it again. And these engines, you can expect problems, for example, like blocked oil passages that can actually negatively impact your phase problems, which is your cam phasers, and that affects your timing. Without that, you don't have an engine running properly. And just Google cam phasers. There's no shortage of commentary on there. Lots of DIYers at home. But at the end of the day, it's these Fords For example, the F-150, 250, Excursion, and Expedition that share these garbage engines from 97 to 2010 way too long, and just means that you just better steer away from this heartbreak drivetrain. So specifically what we're talking about is General Motors, GMC, the pickup trucks are where you're gonna find some of the big issues in some of these late model vehicles. Up here, the roofs could actually fail. They could actually split open. And there was actually a stop work order to stop outputting these vehicles until Chevy or GMC, like this, are able to fix that and rectify that issue. They're also known to have some of the weakest headlights. Now, this is a revamp on the new generation, but this older style here, slightly weaker headlights. Lots of customers complain about that. A lot of people talk about air conditioning condensers being a problem, leaking, and some of their transmission cooler lines, engine oil leaks, coolant leaks. But there's a lot of big issues, unfortunately, with these. Where do you want to start? In this redesign of 2022, you can in fact get yourself a turbo V6. Time will tell how reliable that is. There's also 6.1 liter, and in many cases, there's a 6.2 liter V8. Now, the 6.2 liter V8 is recognized in some of these machines, like this GMC right here. You'll notice it denotes a 6.2 liter V8. There's lots of issues where extended crank time to get these vehicles running. In a lot of cases, they just crank and crank and crank for about 30 seconds, and they may not even start. There's other cases where it's just delayed and it will start, and many cases where you're talking about broken lifters on these vehicles. And yes, the broken rocker issues with these vehicles often means it's rebuilt heads, and so that's a partial engine rebuild, and GMC is not necessarily always allegedly replacing complete engines under the even factory warranty. And other problems, not just with the V6 or the diesel, which can be a problem. We also talk about the infamous or famous 5.3 liter V8 like this. Now here we have, as you can see, the 5.3. These are great trucks. It's a great engine fundamentally, but then they had to go put that engine management system on there to actually reduce number of cylinder capacity, improve fuel economy, and that is what actually made that engine go bad. But there is also lifter rocker issues with some of these 5.3s that does create a lot of problems here for these vehicles. So sadly, all their engines, the diesels potentially, the 5.3s, the 6.2s, all have some issues, and time will tell on the V6s, but that's a big problem. The older transmissions, also a problem. Lots of issues with some of the older transmissions from 2014 to about 2021, where you could have some problems with jerking, bucking, and if well, even potentially needing a full transmission replacement. Some other issues are wireless dock systems. And of course, that 10-speed automatic transmission hasn't exactly been perfect. And then other owners complaining about issues with the GMC Sierra like this, for example, of the vehicle not necessarily holding in four-wheel drive or locks into fifth gear and you can't get it out. There's been some transmission issues already complaining about that. Apple CarPlay, adaptive cruise control that actually doesn't work or cuts out randomly. So there have been a host of issues with some of these modern day vehicles and these latest and greatest generation of the GMC pickup trucks. Now, they're beautiful trucks, and it's one of the few places you can still get yourself a good old-fashioned V8 engine, but unfortunately there are still some quality issues with the transmission, engine, as well as body fitment, panels, electronics. We know some of those issues continue to go round and around. So GMC does unfortunately rank as one of the worst vehicles, the bottom, for reliability based on Consumers Report. This extremely reliable 5.7 liter V8 under the hood that's known and documented to go even on 1 million miles on one of those engines. They're just ultra reliable. Of course, these vehicles, you do get all the chrome and extra bling. These trucks are large and in charge, essentially equivalent to a half-ton or thereabouts. You get all kinds of great technology in terms of comfort in these vehicles. It's a very beefy looking unit. You can tow some weight in your trailer and your boat with this thing. And you even get some nice chrome detail here, large door. These vehicles are absolutely gorgeous. You get some nice finishing inside there. I mean, look inside, you get this beautiful interior detailing. Toyota really stepped up their game. This is 1794 edition Tundra, but the problem isn't this one, it's the newest version, and it's a lot of the Toyotas. Now they're going with a turbo 4-cylinder, turbo 6-cylinder, and now instead of this 5.7 that's been proven over many years, they now went to this 3.4 liter twin turbo V6. Now unfortunately we're starting to see huge issues with that new engine, and so if there's one vehicle I would strongly stay away from, at least till they get the issues sorted out, is the latest Tundra that carries that new 3.4 liter twin turbo V6, and that unfortunately the engine carries in other models, the LX600 as well as the GX550 like we're looking at right here. These are beautiful, and I really wanted to love this vehicle. I was even considering maybe buying one because I love this style. It looks very much like a Defender or Land Rover, but unfortunately there's a problem under that hood, and it's that 3.4 liter V6. So while the Tundra and we know the Toyota Sequoia, all those larger vehicles are going to use that 3.4. Now also, I want to tell you, avoid those for at least for a few years, because what was happening there, they were allegedly getting metal filings throughout the engine as they weren't properly cleansed after the machining process, and all of that metallics wound up in the main bearings that holds and houses the crankshaft. The crankshaft's the reciprocating mass that actually drives the base of the engine. Without that aligned, you're toast. And unfortunately, yes, they're taking out engine upon engine upon engine. It's a big issue. Toyota understands what the issue is now, but it took them some time to figure it out. Here we are, now they're trying to do the customers right. But the unfortunate part is a lot of the other engines, the 2.4 Turbo 4 now, are swapping out anything that resembled a 350 from before. You know, you think about even the Toyotas, the Camrys that carried a V6. Now you're looking at turbocharged 4-cylinder engines, replacing all of their old school ultra reliable drivetrains. So unfortunately, the Toyota Tundra is one you're going to have to avoid like the plague, and if you need to have it, get rid of it before the warranty. Word of caution, dealers don't want to take them for trade right now because they can't do anything with them. Until the recall is properly fixed, it's been validated, these vehicles are just going to sit in a lot, and according to laws, they're not even allowed to resell that vehicle until it's been properly fixed. You might send it to an auction to some unsuspecting sucker who doesn't know any better, but at the end of the day, that's just pure shady, so I would probably avoid it altogether. And another space that we have to talk about are minivans. The Toyota Sienna has arguably one of the most reliable minivans on the market. And Honda has had generally a pretty reliable product as well in the Honda Odyssey, as we'll notice right there. But unfortunately, even the Honda has had some troubles over the years with bad transmissions in some of these vehicles and a few electrical gremlins. But the bottom line is, this just takes us right into the conversation of some of the worst minivans on the market because of junk engines, transmissions, or catastrophic electrical failures. Another one here that's losing popularity at an alarming rate is the latest and greatest Grand Caravan. And this is a Chrysler product, as we can see here. And while a lot of people consider these very versatile, useful family haulers, the fact remains is it does only get about a 3.5 out of 5 star from Repair Pal, and that's solely because of reliability issues. Here we have definitely not a pretty looking unit. This is the Grand Caravan, looks very much like a Pacifica right here. And it does have this sort of obnoxious looking finishing treatment here. Of course, you get the big sliding doors, basic interior that makes you feel like you're sitting in a barrel of monkeys. Yeah, it's not a particularly great looking unit, very generic, very vanilla yogurt. It's not just about the styling, and it's certainly not even about the price, because the price isn't as cheap as the quality of this vehicle reflects it should. Problems with brakes like that, again, spongy. They don't hold up all that well over a period of time, and they wear out very aggressively. It's a big, heavy vehicle, and the brakes are a little bit undersized for that. Drivetrain problems, we know no shortage of issues with a lot of the engines and transmissions, steering issues with these vehicles, faulty TIPM, and that's a totally integrated power module that's known to fail in a lot of Jeep, Chrysler, Dodge products. Yeah, that controls all your inputs, your lights, your mirrors, your windows, all the other electrics on the vehicle, even including, unfortunately, the fuel pump, which runs the vehicle itself. And the TIPM, when it fails, it basically just goes blank, or it starts glitching out and different things work or they don't work. And it's a several $1,000 repair if you're going to do it at the dealer. Sure, there's thrifty people all over the internet that'll tell you, oh, it's an easy, quick and swap. But at the end of the day, not everybody is a DIYer, and it's the type of repair that's a pain in the rump, and it costs you thousands of dollars to fix. Not uncommon for this thing to puke out oil from all sorts of different seals. Stuck in park, yeah, you can't get it into gear, that's a problem. Transmissions, to move this thing down the road, transversely mounted engine, this transmission is a weak point and always has been for these Caravans, Plymouth Voyagers, and all of these types of vehicles. Valve stem corrosion leads, of course, to premature valve guide wear, and of course, hence, you'll see smoke blowing out the backside. Power window motor issues, again, sometimes related to the TIPM, and as well, noise in the front suspension, and these front ends are often very fragile. I personally know several people that have these types of vehicles, and it just gets clunky and bangy, and the whole front end just starts banging around and feels loose, and the whole car just feels like it's coming unglued right under your very hands in the control of that steering. So it's a poorly built vehicle. There's a certain price point. Some people feel like that's the only option, but honestly, maybe look at some of the other options from Toyota and Honda. You're going to get a far better vehicle for marginally more money. It's going to way outlast these vehicles, and you'll have so many issues with these likely that it's going to be a pain. So honestly, if you need to own these outside of warranty, don't bother, because these are the rental car specials, and that's why you see them on the rental car fleet yards. The next one is the subcompact SUV space, and everybody knows that Jeep has had their certain level of struggles. Here's a Patriot. It's not very patriotic to buy one of these, and here's a little Compass right here, as you'll notice right there, has had no shortage of problems: oil burning, coolant leaks, and catastrophic failures with electrical problems. The bottom line is I can't even keep pointed straight, and that Compass only points me down to the toilet, because these are some of the worst subcompact SUVs. But let's get into my list of some of the best of the worst subcompacts. And the next one is number 7, what we're looking at here in white. It's a great looking little vehicle, and a lot of people love them, but it's basically the Hyundai Kona's other brother right here from another mother. It does look sharp. We've got Kia's new design language, of course, some great detail on the front. Love those headlights, and some great wheels there too. Of course, some great design themes and little touch access in there. And you've got this great little roof rack up the top, little overhang at the back. Looks great. How about the LED taillights? And of course, you have these fake little back ends here. There's actually no exhaust here. It's just made to look that way, but it's entirely fake on this Seltos by Kia. They do have great looking interiors, which are fun and fresh, but of course they're from the family of Hyundai and Kia with some of those engine issues. Some of that carries over. Some key things to note here is related to park, disengagement, and engagement. Either it works or it doesn't work. You may not be able to get it out of park, or you may not be able to get it into park when you need it to. Oil leaks down under there. You could have some oil leaks. That's not uncommon, and unfortunately stalling, and this vehicle won't restart when you're at a set of lights. That has been a known issue as well with some of these in relatively small numbers, but unfortunately these are one of those vehicles that are death by association, and unfortunately, because it's similar to the Kona, which has been around, it has too many problems and it's too much of a risk. So maybe skip the Seltos and go with something like this beautiful little Honda CR-V, guaranteed to run twice as long, and you won't have all those nickel and dime issues that you're going to find with some of those Kias and Hyundais. Now, a carryover into 2025, it's not a new model, it's this little unit wrapped in this baby blue skin. And we're looking at the Bronco, but this is the Bronco Sport. This is the baby one. This has the smaller engine, doesn't have the V6 that you're finding in the full-size Bronco. And these ones have a whole host of problems. We have this fun little grille here, and it has been a popular vehicle for a while until people start finding out what kind of engine issues, but we'll get to that. Basic wheels, cheap plastic, Bronco script, and as well, lots more plastic around. Of course, lots more plastic, and yet lots more plastic again. You get the drift here, lots of plastic. Plastic up top. Okay, you get a sunroof and a beautiful set of seats in this particular unit. Look at the small infotainment screen in there. Absolutely tiny, but that's the least of your concerns, because there's a 2-liter and there's a 1.5-liter in these vehicles. But did you hear the latest recall? The 2-liter EcoBoost engine has not been without troubles and has had some significant transmission issues. The vehicle in general isn't the worst, and a lot of people are okay with that 2-liter engine. The big problem comes with fuel leaks and injectors cracking, allegedly, on the 1.5, which is a big issue. NHTSA has chased Ford around the block to say you've got to fix this, and Ford came up with a patch, said they would fix it, set a tune in there so it detects a drop in pressure. They put a little trough and drain that fuel to drain onto the ground. What a catastrophic situation that is. Instead, NHTSA looked at it and said, no, we're not good with that. So Ford, instead of shutting down the vehicle while you're driving down the highway at 70 miles an hour because it detected that pressure drop, the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration said we need to find something more legitimate, a better fix. And so transmission issues as well as electrics have not been solo in the list of problems that you're going to find with the Ford Bronco Sport, like you're looking at right here. You also can't forget that in general, the EcoBoost has had a whole series of issues, 2-liter or 1.5, especially where you're dealing with the oil pump drive belt and as well being submersed in oil. There's a lot of questionable technology on top of direct injection, variable valve timing, and turbocharging just adds to the host and suite of problems that you could anticipate. And these vehicles clearly, in my own personal opinion and my experience, are not built for any kind of longevity. For 2025, find another option. So another heap that I can't recommend is this little unit here. Starts about $25,000. Chevy product, enough said, but let's take a look around. Beautiful front grille and fascia, of course, great headlights on this vehicle. I love that design theme for sure. I think they had it nailed here. Of course, plastic to protect from the rocks that come off the road, which does a great job all the way along from front to side. Everything's protected there. Of course, you have this great little aluminum look here, but it is plastic. It's not actually aluminum by any means. And what we're looking at is a Trailblazer all-wheel drive, and this is the LT version. It does look very sporty from the back here. As you see that overhang, all kinds of piano gloss black here, roof rack here, and an interior that looks quite sporty, spunky, and again, looks better than probably what you would expect for 25 grand, although it does still feel a bit Fisher Price. What kind of drivetrains are you expecting in this? Well, first of all, you get a 9-speed automatic, and even worse, if you can imagine the engine is a 1.2 liter 3-cylinder engine. Wow, no power, and it's working too hard to move this vehicle down the road. So clearly it's overstressing. It's going to wear out way before its time, but there's a lot of problems creeping up already in this late model Trailblazer. For example, missing front seatbelt attachment bolts. Of course, that would be a big safety hazard. We also have equipment failure, all kinds. Interior and body parts aren't necessarily holding up the best. You get an excessive road noise, even though you have a road type tire. People complain about road noise, but that's what you get in a $25,000 vehicle. We get the body shakes. Whoa, shaky, shaky coming down the road. Tons of recalls throughout this vehicle. A very sluggish engine, which I already referred to as a 3-cylinder. What would you expect from that? But people are complaining there. The electric brake booster, there's your brakes, and of course the booster's up there, but clearly not enough oomph, and that's been a problem as well. Speed control issues. We also talk about some people complaining about too stiff of a ride for what it is. Transmission performance isn't the greatest. Even with it being a 9-speed automatic, it somehow just doesn't find the right gear. There's also electrical problems throughout, and the climate control has been noted to be problematic, so not a well-liked vehicle. And for $25,000, I'd say keep your money or go somewhere else. So viewer Kenny B actually reaches out and says, the engine package in these popular little sporty subcompact SUVs are a troublesome little sort. And what we're dealing with here is clearly, it's the little blue oval right here. As we can see, it's from Ford. And look, it's an EcoBoost 4-wheel drive. And yes, it's the Escape right there. But let's take a quick look around and we'll talk about some of these engine issues. Very stylish looking unit. Obviously has these Pep Boy looking units there. Of course, alloy wheels, beautiful front headlights, and of course, the big oval right there pointing in the screen. But what do you have other than transmission issues and other big electronic troubles? You actually have engine troubles galore. And according to vehiclehistory.com, there's a whole plethora of issues that you can experience. Potentially, a lot of them have to do with coolant. Many issues exist with this particular 1.5 or 2-liter EcoBoost engine. Some of them related to coolant leaks, sudden loss of power, vehicle rollaways, and even NHTSA has addressed concerns with brake fluid and faulty airbag systems. Now specifically, we're dealing with engines from 2013 to 2019 where we have coolant issues migrating into the engine. Well, what's that all about? Well, allegedly on these engines, coolant often leaks down into the cylinders. And when that happens, they end up burning coolant. Sometimes it means coolant, white smoke coming out of the exhaust tips, which could result in overheating, failing, consumption of coolant, and as well, potential for catching fire. Another engine fire potential right here, just looming to happen. And drivers often notice that this cylinder head was cracked, which was one of the contributing factors. Poor quality as well as the thin sidewalls on the combustion chamber. And depending on the severity of the failures, $1,000 might be the card, or even up to $6,000 or $7,000 if you're having to do a full motor job. So it's not a cheap repair, and most of them have failed catastrophically well before 70 or 80,000 miles. Putting them at that 60,000 mile range is a stretch. And next we're into another Euro machine. And while they're great, sporty, fun little vehicles, and they actually feel like they're well put together, I personally know somebody who actually had to return it back to the dealer because excessive oil consumption. Let's take a quick look around and try to understand, first of all, why people do buy these. In fact, I mean, is it the cool wheels that are high gloss? Beautiful. How about those awesome little taillights that are LED style? Of course, you have the Volkswagen there and its Tiguan. This was the 4Motion, all-wheel drive. Love the fake tail exhaust tip look. Obviously no exhaust tips there, but it's made to look that way. Love the front finishing on these modern day Volkswagens. Obviously harkens to many Audis out there today. And of course we have this great little fake vent system on the front bumper by this great Volkswagen. We notice this is the R version as well. Gotta love the overall looks of this vehicle. Well, what about the top? Beautiful oversized glass on top gives you lots of light in the cabin for all the passengers riding on board. Of course, you got that great little roof rack to haul your junk projects to the dumpster. Beautiful vehicle. What about the inside? The interiors are very similar to an Audi. High quality, top shelf materials, and they feel very nice to the touch. In fact, a few short years ago, driving a European vehicle meant you drove something not just stylish, but performed well and was built like a Sherman tank. But isn't quite such the case anymore, and there's a lot of issues potentially with some of these late model Tiguans. For example, the transmission on some of these have been known. Many customers have reported very aggressive, jarring upshifts, a little too abrasive for most people's tastes. Another situation is a lot of customers are finding when they tap in the throttle, they go to suddenly accelerate, and they're finding themselves the vehicle stuttering and lurching, in some cases outright stalling altogether. Quite worrisome, especially if you're trying to clear a busy intersection. Then another problem is what's tucked underneath behind these wheels right there. We have the brakes, and there's been lots of comments of people applying the brake and actually having a significant delay before the vehicle actually starts to slow down. Obviously, a lot of times if you want brakes and you hit brakes, you expect brakes, and if you don't get it, it's extremely worrisome and potentially really dangerous. Don't know what's going on there. But there's also some brake issues, and it's related more specifically to the electronic side of the game. And what is it? Well, if we look up front here, these vehicles have brake sensors. So if there's pedestrians crossing the street, they're there to detect that and automatically brake the vehicle. But what's happening sometimes is those sensors are either faulty or the system just doesn't work. So what happens is there could be something there and the vehicle does not respond as it should, or in fact, it could be a situation where it activates and there's nobody in front, causing a serious issue. If you're driving down the road, minding your own goddamn business, and all of a sudden the thing just locks up, assuming there's somebody in front and there's nobody there. Other problems with ABS not functioning properly or the electronic stability control not functioning. Clearly there's a lot of electronics and electric issues with some of these vehicles. There's also been situations where you don't even put the key in and then all of a sudden it lights up some of the electronic features, of course discharging the battery unexpectedly. Some other problems that some owners have reported is the lane keep assist. You know, that assistance that keeps your vehicle between the lanes, where normally it's supposed to keep you between the lanes, but there's been cases where it's forced you out of the lane unexpectedly. Clearly a bit of a glitch. Sadly, there's also engine-related issues with these vehicles too. In some cases, not always, but some have reported intake manifolds that fail prematurely, which sometimes means you have to change a water pump, the intake manifold. Often there's been people claiming that they've had to do 2 or 3 of those within 20 or 30,000 miles. Absolutely obscene. There's also cases with oil leakage and oil consumption, which, as I mentioned, somebody I personally knew had those massive oil consumption issues with one of these Tiguans. Turbochargers have also been known to fail at way too low a mileage. Other engine-related issues: on the front end of the engine, you have the timing chain that keeps all your valves and your pistons in synchronization so the vehicle runs properly. Fires, puts it out the backside. Now, unfortunately, sometimes there's been an issue with some of the tensioners or the chains themselves where they actually fail, and if they fail bad enough, it can be an outright catastrophic boom. So clearly, there's been enough noted issues with some of these models that I, in my right mind, can't necessarily recommend these vehicles. Now, if you're looking for an alternative, if you want to stick European, you can go to the Volvo XC40. Also not particularly flawless, as well as a BMW X3 with the base B48. That's a 4-cylinder engine. Also, for a few $1,000s more than this, could be an option. But just know this, anything European, even if it's an alternative to this, likely have their own little nuances that you're gonna have to deal with it. But if you want just dependable, try a Toyota RAV4 that will run forever. Little hot rod in red, and you definitely don't want to keep it because not only is it cheap at $20,000 US, yeah, you can get into a car that's very affordable, but it's basically throwaway. It's like buying a pizza and throwing out the pizza box when you're all done. Not a great vehicle. I'm just being quite frank with you, and there's a few issues and reasons why that is. Even at 20 grand, you don't want to buy this. It's cheap, yes, but you don't want it. I mean, I see how people get sucked in. They like buying this because this little Kia looks cute. It's the Soul, yeah. It has a very squared off back end, looks very unique. And yeah, it does have a lot of great features like alloy wheels, great color keyed handles, beautiful little mirrors that are also colored to match, wonderful LED headlights on the front end. Of course, you've got great grills now and wonderful little lights on the front end, and a very boxy look, almost looks like the Ford Edge. The interior is very versatile, not the highest quality. It feels like a fishing tackle box, but it works. So why do you not want this car at any cost? Well, in case you haven't really seen, the NHTSA has tons of recalls associated with many of these burning up roadside, in some cases actually hurting people, and that's the worst part. What you don't want to have is a vehicle actually injuring or worse the occupants. That's sadly, allegedly, what's been happening with some of these vehicles, and a lot of it has to do with the engine. But let's talk about a few of the other issues. Some customers are complaining about knocking noises in the front there when you're turning full lock. Click, 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 knock, knock, knock. So it's making front end noises. Some other issues are a ticking noise under the hood, tick, tick, and you don't even know what it is. But believe me, we know what it is because there's been lots of recalls associated with that. As well, the knocking noise could be part of an issue too, because the knocking noises, you're actually rod bearings. In 2012 to 16 are the worst years, but they're clearly all too much of a risk for me to even advise. You definitely want to stay away from them, because if I was a betting man and the trends and you extrapolate and draw a best fit line, this will fit in right perfectly with some of the older generations, and it's rod knocks. Because of some of the machining, the metal from the machining wound up in the oiling passages, plugged them off, caused overheating and excess cooking of those rod bearings, and of course resulted in burning, catastrophic failure. Often meant as little as 80,000 miles and you could have an engine that basically seized, blew up, or even worse, in some cases they burned roadside. Sure, Kia put in a knock sensor to detect if you have that noise, because the knock sensor can detect early on whether it's starting to see some of those problems at the bottom end of the engine. But the sad part is, all that is a band-aid. That's just a detection point, just to tell you, the owner, that get your schwanz back into the dealership and get the car looked at. It's not there to necessarily prevent the engine from breaking. The engine's going to break if it's going to break, and very unpredictably so. So the bottom line is, the Kia Soul, as cute as it is and as good a value as it appears to be, definitely don't want to buy one of those. And clearly we have a Chevy product, and this is a Trax. Yes, oh, it has a little trailer hitch, but I wouldn't dare trailering anything with this. You'll blow the engine for sure. Yeah, it does little alloy wheels and plastic shrouding and cutesy little mirrors, and yeah, a little trailer trash rack on top. But here you have fake plastic, more fake plastic, more fake plastic. It doesn't just begin and end with the Chevy Trax, it's also the Cruze, it's also the Buick Encore, as well as the little Chevy Sonic that share the 1.4 liter Ecotec turbocharged dumpster fire of an engine. But that engine under that hood is where you can get into a lot of trouble. There's a lot of problems. The biggest problem is you can't even get a replacement engine until probably in 2024. They're backlogged, they're back ordered, and if you actually happen to blow an engine on this, you're gonna have to wait. What sort of engines would you anticipate with this little unit? How about oil burning? Is that bad enough? Nobody likes an oil burning engine. How about turbocharged failures, as well as other internal engine catastrophes? We can't forget the piston rings and holdout pistons are another one, through the detonation and blowing a hole, thus resulting in a catastrophic engine. Boom! Oh, and that is all it. All over, but the crying car wizard confirms that. Yes, in fact, I too know of several mechanics that have dealt with these vehicles, and that Ecotec engine is just one for the dumpster. Unfortunately, it's one that won't make 60,000 miles. Sorry. Another vehicle that's definitely not worth the trouble. What we're looking at here, it's this great little Nissan product. What is it? Well, let's take a quick look. Of course, people like these because they have some great design themes. This one has all kinds of different accents and colors. Yeah, you have this big bulbous looking light, and what's this? I don't know, a couple of bug eyes going on there. Yeah, Nissan, so that means stands for bad transmissions with CVTs. Of course, back there you have this great little wing, and of course, great rocker panels. Look at the tail end of this car. Looks quite weird and obnoxious, but there it is, and people like them. Not sure why, in this Juke. And this is the SV all-wheel drive version. And these vehicles do start at about $25,000. The problem is there's way too many issues, and then you have to be caught driving this thing. Manual clutch issues are one of the big problems. CVTs, so the rubber band transmission, Jatco style, is a big issue with some of these vehicles. Recalls? You betcha, more than their share. As well, loose timing chains rattling and clinking, potentially jumping a cog, and then you got really big problems. Fuel leaks that potentially could lead to a boom, as well as blocked oil lines, causing all kinds of problems. These vehicles are plagued with issues, not the greatest representation of Nissan, and clearly with that transmission, it's one that you need to stay away from. A lot of people are fans of the Jeep brand. They have some of the best four-wheel drive systems. People trust that they'll get them in and out of inclement weather or poor driving conditions. And while some of that might be true, the fact of the matter is these things are poorly built, problematic, and much, much lower predicted reliability on any given model that you buy. Now looking at this thing from the side, it looks like 9 out of 10 other generic looking mid-level, mid-size SUVs. But let's take a quick look around. Of course, beautiful little wheels package on there, and I can see why people get sucked into this particular brand. With the Jeep name, people often feel that it's trustworthy. And there's Jeep. You gotta like that for the most part because of their 4x4 systems. Lots of plastic. It'll wear well if you're driving this in rough weather. Of course, you got the great little rear wiper. Helps to keep all that slop off the back window. Great little overhang to keep the swirlies from landing on there. Beautiful for the most part. And again, lots of plastic to keep the rocks off the side. It'll wear well from a cosmetic standpoint. Now the front is a little odd and obscure. You really have to love that vehicle, just the way it looks from the front. It's literally one of the least attractive SUVs on the market today. In fact, it's so ugly that this mother wouldn't feed its child with a slingshot if that were the case. Now there's no sunroof on top of this particular model, and it's even got these great roof racks to haul your bedbug infested mattress to the dump. What about the interior of this? Looks like a combination of Lego, origami, Fisher-Price, as well as Tupperware. And realizing, of course, it's not a premium vehicle. You can't expect all the premium touches, but unfortunately all the breakdowns and failure points also suggest it's a price point vehicle. Here, I'll give you some examples. Firstly, FCA offered up a bulletin because of a check engine light due to a code P0520, which was an oil sending unit. Now, while it was fairly cheap to replace, in fact, it was still a nuisance and it was another trip to the dealer. There's also oil leaks from the oil filter housing and a whole plethora of other oil leaks throughout. And depending on where specifically it came from, it could be a costly venture or it could be relatively affordable. Also, cooling system woes from this vehicle. You could have a sticking thermostat, which would cause P0128, which is also a cause from potential overheating, which could destroy that engine in short order. In addition, if you had the 3.2 liter V6, if you did happen to notice some ticking noise coming from a top, it could actually be bad lifters or rockers with that engine too, meaning top-end engine rebuild. Misfires caused by bad spark plugs, or even more importantly, the coils themselves, which are kind of expensive. Or if you have that glorious 2.4 liter multi-air engine, it's going to use oil. Be ready for it. Have an extra couple of quarts in the trunk because you're gonna need it. And some owners reported vibration at low to moderate speeds, and the only fix for that was replacing the half shafts where that was a known issue. Not an inexpensive fix, but again, imagine doing that without warranty. There's also unfortunately a plethora of different electronic issues, software updates that were required for these vehicles, and a general build quality that just left you in awe. The type of awe that makes you wonder, oh my God, how did they even pass quality control department? So if you wanted something a little bit better, more reliable, I would opt up for maybe a Mazda CX-5. Much more reliable, much better lasting, won't use the oil that these things do, and you will have far less problems. Another one is this wild looking little car behind us is a Kia Sportage, and these are great looking little cars. I can see why people are attracted to that. It has a very stout, kind of sporty looking front end on it specifically. I mean, look at the front end. It looks elevated, popped up, and it just looks like it's ready for some playtime. Great little headlights on there of this Kia, and you have this wonderful grille. How about that front end? I love that style. Everything looks like it's stepped up in terms of quality. I would say looks flashier than your average Toyota RAV4. It even has plastic guards all the way along to protect the paintwork from rocks. Of course, you have these beautiful two-tone handles back and front, and an interesting little mirror with the side lights. How about these windows? I love that contour at the very top, how it kind of juts down. Even more impressive is this hood, how it sort of flares up at the sides and it makes it look very strong and staunch. Look, you've even got these great little flares here, makes the vehicle look sporty. Of course, it's all-wheel drive, so it's great in the snow and the mud. And of course, it's got that beautiful running gear on top to haul that bed bug infested mattress to the dump. Great little rear finishing here, has that sharp drop-off overhang, and beautiful LED taillights at the back. Nice little chrome strip, makes this car look very sharp from pretty much every angle. Love these little marker lights on this Sportage by Kia, and it's an EX variation. It even has a very interesting rear finishing, how it sharpens down at the back. The car looks very sporty. How about the interior? Actually, the quality of the interior looks very, very good, and they're certainly improving year on year to make these Kias and Hyundais in line with a lot of the more premium models within the Japanese variations. But there's a problem. There's a big problem. If only these were electrified. Why? Because the 2 liter and a 2.4 liter GDI engines, boom, there's a recall because they have been known to catastrophically fail. How is that? Well, somehow during a little thing they call machining process, what they did was they left some burrs behind. So there's a little material metal particulate that wound up in the oil passages of the engine and the crankshaft. So when the vehicle starts to be put in commissioned and put into service, the oil basically carries some of those filings through the engine, and in some cases locks up some of the cooling passages, so the rod bearings underneath the engine at the bottom of the reciprocating mass start to overheat. When that happens, these cars have been known to burn up roadside. On top of that, there's a hydraulic electronic control unit that have been known to burn up even at will when the vehicle's parked. And the ABS control unit is also known to burn up. So unfortunately, these vehicles, as great looking as they are, they're suffering a lot of little problems. And while yes, there's lots and thousands of very happy owners of these vehicles, sadly, there's many, many unhappy vehicle owners that have been left roadside and even have been put out physically by the results of this poor construction in these vehicles. So could you imagine if this great little vehicle was powered by electrification? Guess what? Hyundai and Kia now are quickly advancing their electrified motor drivetrains because some of these engines they just want to put in the rearview mirror and forget all about it. So if you can get this with only electrification, you probably got a winner. And if you're looking for a mid-size SUV and you've been searching for a while, chances are a Dodge Durango somehow fits into that search criteria. This one has a third row, but it's clearly not one of the best products. Stellantis hasn't made a good product in years, in my personal opinion. Of course, these vehicles have the TIPM problem, the totally integrated power module, you have leaks, you have coolant problems, engine issues, you even get the infamous tick on the top end of the engine, transmission problems, you even get exhaust manifold cracking and splitting and making all kinds of noises. It's a sad state of affairs, poorly built. The interior looks like a fisherman's tackle box, and sadly, this begins the list of the worst mid-size SUVs. The first one on my list is this white piece of junk parked right behind me. Why is it so crappy? Well, look, it's parked next to the tires, and then we have a Hyundai next to it that's falling apart, and then, of course, it's how fitting to have this great vehicle right beside it. Before I dive into the details, let's take a look. Cosmetically, this is a horrifying vehicle as well, but we'll get into the mechanical issues. Let's look. I mean, look at this thing. Very basic, small, petite, not particularly well made. We got lots of plastic all over the place. This is plastic fantastic throughout. Small, cheap style handles. Very basic set of rear tail lights on this rig. Of course, you got these roof racks, which is great for taking that mouse-infested couch to the dumpster. Of course, yeah, okay, great. We got a set of great looking wheels on there. But what about the inside? Also, Tupperware and Glad garbage bag got together and had a love child. This is literally what you'd have. So what is this junk? Well, we're talking about a Jeep Patriot. That's right. The worst year is a 2015. But trust me when I say these are all junk. You definitely don't want to have one of these. They're going to cause you nothing but heartburn, heartache, and you're literally going to have a stroke over the repairs and the failure rates of these particular junky vehicles. Nothing from the Jeep and Dodge Chrysler product lineup is particularly well made. These ones definitely stand out as particular junk. But let's talk about some of the main issues that you can actually experience. Some of them is actually leaks. You can get water leaks, of course. Right here, we have a sunroof. You can get water that leaks in through there, of course, as well. Leaks through here. Look at that high quality piece of finish right there. Of course, the doors can let water in. And these essentially can be converted into a hot tub because they leak like a sieve. So there can be a collection of water that gets in there. And that, of course, causes lots of problems with electrics. Garbage. Now also, particularly for the 2015 model year and certain years, they actually have a stalling issue. You're driving along, la-di-da, minding your own business, taking it easy, chilling like a villain, and also, and the vehicle stalls and dies right in the middle of the road. Even worse, could you imagine having to make a left-hand turn in busy traffic here if you're in North America? And you can't get around the intersection because the car stalls in the middle of your travel? That could be detrimental, absolutely. But a stalling issue with no check engine lights is even worse because it stalls and you don't even know why it stalled. Most vehicles today at least spit out a CEL so you know where the problem sort of stems from. But at least here you couldn't even figure that out. Another typical issue that you're finding with a lot of Jeep products, I mentioned a lot about this with the Wranglers and specifically some of the other Jeep products, and it's called the TIPM. It's the totally integrated poop module, essentially. Well, pardon the acronym, but that's the way I see it. Anyway, what it is a general brain. It's the module where all your sensors and other modules all come into the main brain. Well, it's very common for the TIPM to fail. When it does, you're going to have issues with lights not working, or they come, they go. Maybe your tachometer and your gauges start working, stop working. Things just randomly just ghosty stop working. That's trash. That's called your TIPM, and that's typical for a lot of Jeep products. So that is going to be a major issue. But there's bigger problems if you can believe it. These vehicles could be outfitted with a couple of different transmissions. One, you could get a manual gearbox, and that one, a lot of people would comment shifting into third gear or shifting in general would result in a lot of grinding noises. Crunchy, grindy sounds, clearly not a well-built unit. But even more problematic is the CVT transmission that you can get in this. That's the continuously variable transmission that you normally find in most of these vehicles. And sadly, with relatively short miles on them, 60, 70,000 miles, you're starting to find a lot of the CVTs actually starting to overheat. They start cooking and boiling, and then they just fail. They make a lot of noises, grinding, whistling, whining noises, and not too much like some of our federal leaders. They make a lot of weird noises that we just can't get past. You can't get that noise out of here. But what we have is a transmission that starts making noises. That CVT is a problem. When it fails, because it's not if, it's when it fails, you're looking for a repair of about $3,900, $4,200 in that range. And the worst part is, on a good day, a car like this, after it's 3 or 4 years old, it's only worth that to begin with. So could you imagine having a car that's worth $5,000 and having to pour a $4,000 transmission repair on there? Garbage. They won't last, guaranteed to fail, and you just don't want them. And the next one that's most problematic and likely going to be a problem buying in 2025, just due to some of the quality challenges, is this vehicle right here. Clearly it's a Jeep brand and it has the big bold grille. Naturally, this is the older version. This is the newer version. You can tell quite substantially different. Beautiful little front end on it. Yes, you get nice alloy wheels on the Grand Cherokee. Two-tone handles, big beautiful running rack as well as glass, and it's a good looking vehicle. Some even argue that this is a luxury vehicle, which I think they seriously went outside their swim lanes on this one. Well, you do have these impressive little taillights, LEDs. You do get a set of exhaust tips that you have this nice shroud, but you'll notice there's a lot of carbon developing on the tailpipes there. Painted fender flares and third row seating makes it very practical, and a lot of people are buying these, but we know the conundrums that Stellantis is going through right now, and Jeep is struggling with quality control challenges. And the real question is, are they going to continue to be in existence in 3 or 4 years from now at the current pace? Jeeps aren't selling very well, and a big part of it is the pricing, which makes them poor value for the most part, as well as the quality control issues. A lot of people are talking about brakes prematurely wearing out, power steering issues in a short couple of years, premature brake fail, and a few years ago they had that issue with the transmission, and you'll notice this one here has the rotary knob. Not a great design by any stretch of the imagination. A lot of people don't love the ergonomics of it as well. There was one of these that rolled away a few years ago. Apparently the driver got out of the vehicle, thought they put it in park. It actually wasn't fully engaged into park, rolled and crushed that person, sadly enough. There's some quality challenges, ergonomic challenges, as well as just a whole host of electrical gremlins you could anticipate. A big part of it is because the TIPM, the totally integrated power module, which controls all of your electrical inputs, outputs, lights, mirrors, power windows, gauges, and even the fuel pump is powered by the TIPM. So a lot of these issues, when they start creeping in there, are related to that module, which end up costing customers often thousands of dollars. Sure, there's people out there that say, yeah, you can go third party and get them rebuilt. Yeah, that's always an option, but if you get these fixed properly at the dealership, you're expecting to pay thousands of dollars to repair. So the quality, the price, just not aligned. And the Jeep Grand Cherokee for 2025, maybe look for something a little different. Perhaps maybe a Lexus, possibly an Acura. If you've been looking for large SUVs, enter the Nissan Armada. Now, while they're not the most unreliable product that Nissan makes, there's no shortage of issues. Look, at the rear suspension system is sagging because the air loses air in there, and of course then naturally you have this natural dropping effect. This thing is larger than a barn, and sadly Nissan has struggled with a lot of reliability challenges in the last few years, and the Armada, while it's an absolute sinking ship with massive fuel consumption, aging infrastructure, as well as a whole host of cheesy components, from that fake peel-on chrome to all the Pep Boy designs on the front and the side of these vehicles. These Armadas have had issues with catalytic converters blowing out, transmission issues, and I have a friend who actually had one and they had to replace an engine. So let's get into a list of some of the worst full-size SUVs. And then we segue into another Japanese brand right here, and we're talking about Nissan. And right here we have the latest and greatest Nissan Pathfinder. Now, many moons ago, Pathfinder and the Toyota 4Runner were clearly competitors. They were both great vehicles, they both lasted a long time, and they would run essentially forever with minimal maintenance. But things changed along the way. Toyota continued down the path of reliability, and Nissan, they tried a few things. Didn't always work. But before we talk about the plethora of issues that you'd often find with many of the Pathfinders, let's take a quick look at the latest and greatest of Pathfinders, because clearly they've really updated the styling a lot. It looks great. Let's take a look. So here we are, the latest Pathfinder. Right there, obviously set up for towing. This new Pathfinder, we're talking about the Platinum, and it's 4-wheel drive, so it's good to go on any amount of inclement weather driving. Of course, we have a lot of great plastic cladding all the way along, keeps all the rocks and the ugly weather off of the vehicle. Love the new style of taillights. They're almost copying what Toyota's doing with that little lip right there. And of course, they have this strong ledge, bulbous shoulder right there on the rear of the vehicle. You'll see very stout looking windshield wiper. And of course, I love that overhang. It actually looks more substantial than just a thin little baseball cap lip. Here, love that sleek look. Almost going with the Range Rover look on that. Beautiful wheels right there. They're absolutely gorgeous. They're laser cut now on this amazing looking Pathfinder right here. Love some of the chrome detail on this vehicle. You've got piano gloss black mirrors. Of course, I love these new style grills on this Nissan. As you see right there, gorgeous. Look at the detailing on there, as well as the detailing and the flares in painted colors along this vehicle. Gorgeous. Even the interior is dressed up, looks very luxurious, far superior than previous generations. And you even have this great top rack to haul the junk to the dump. So then you ask, what is so wrong with a Nissan that you just can't fix? Like, every vehicle has problems. Well, yes, they do. But there's a lot of expensive problems with some of these. With many slightly older generation Pathfinders, the transmission would fail. Somewhere in that 80 to 120,000 miles, you're almost guaranteed coolant migrating within the transmission and then finally calling it quits. And that was a fix of about $3,900 to $4,500 depending on where you live. Very expensive repair and very common. Another issue is, of course, coolant leaks. Now, not just into the transmission where it causes the obvious catastrophic damage, but you had other coolant leaks throughout. Constantly kept you dancing trying to keep those coolant leaks from dripping the fluid all over the ground. Another issue was on the front of the engine. If you heard that rattle or that noise on a startup, often a cold startup, that usually meant timing chains were loose, but it's because the timing chain guides were allowing to get loose, and of course because of that, sometimes you had the prevalence to actually skip a cog and then your timing goes out of whack. And then what do you think happens? Boom! That's what happens. If you lose the timing on your engine, that's valve and piston clearance, and it goes out to lunch, the vehicle is done. But even if you have just the timing chain noise and you want to fix it, you're still dealing with about a $2,000 repair. Now, another problem with some of these vehicles were the air conditioning systems. Sometimes customers would notice a lot of strange noise coming from under the hood, particularly when the vehicle's idling or running, and that's of course when it's operating the compressor to provide the amount of cooling capacity if your air conditioning is running. But you'd often get strange noises, or you wouldn't even get hot or cold air blowing through the system. Obviously problematic, and it's something worth noting because it was a very, very common issue. And then another problem was back in here, and we're talking about a fuel sensor. Of course, the fuel level sensor was a problem. You'd be driving along thinking life's good, and of course then all of a sudden you run out of gas because the fuel sending unit was incorrect and you wouldn't read it properly on the dashboard, and of course the vehicle would just die roadside. I'd say it's pretty important if your fuel sending unit isn't working. How else do you know if you have the fuel? What about even to get through a busy intersection, all of a sudden the vehicle sputters because it's out of fuel? That could be a potentially detrimental situation, not to mention just a major inconvenience overall, having to keep your vehicle topped right up. If you know, for example, the thing's uncalibrated and not reading, say for example, the last half of the tank, how would you even know how much fuel you really have? So at the end of the day, they're beautifully restyled. This new design is absolutely gorgeous. The problem is it's a risk because the predicted reliability is still questionable. With what we've seen on the previous generation, it's always going to be a gamble. Whereas Toyota, if you're looking for a great alternative, has the wonderful, venerable, rock-solid Toyota 4Runner, which is guaranteed to run for hundreds of thousands of miles without question. That's a great option. Then what are we looking at here? This is in fact a Volkswagen right there, and it's large, an inch charge. Here's another Volkswagen, but you'll notice this one's quite a bit larger. It has this great front end, this front grille piece. It definitely has a very unique front hood assembly. You get these flared front haunches, beautiful wheels, lots of glass on top, and of course a great running rack there. And we circle around to the back and you'll notice you get these great beefy looking taillights and two tailpipes there. You can tow some weight with it, not sure I would want to, on this Atlas right here by VW. A lot of people assume the German manufactured products are superior in every way, and in some cases that is the truth, but in a lot of cases they're just over-engineered for the sake of over-engineering, and it will cost you reliability in the long term. Some classic issues you'll find in here are the clock spring on the steering wheel. Of course, that leads to all your controls and electrics on the steering wheel. That is a problem with some of these. Fuel injectors. Oh no, that's a big problem, and that can cost big bucks on a direct injected engine. Another sad state of affairs on earlier models, you can get some wind noise that you'll find typically coming in this A-pillar right there, and you're whistling in there and customers are wondering what is going on there, but that is another issue that you can expect. We won't even talk about all the electric problems in these as well. So while they are great and they're not considered a true luxury vehicle, sadly the German engineering comes through in spades. Poor quality, over-engineered, and expensive to repair and maintain. Definitely one you don't want to even buy. And so the next one is this little SUV right behind me here. Unfortunately, Subaru has been plagued with a few problems lately. Of course, we've all heard about the CVT problems, continuously variable transmission issues, as well as heavy oil consumption and blown engines in some cases because of PCV plugging off. But there's more problems, and unfortunately, the hopes were higher. Let's take a quick look around and talk about some of the nuances and some of the things that Subaru has struggled with. Let's take a look. And here we have the new Subaru, of course, wonderful little look down there. Of course, we have these great LED headlights, beautiful projector lamps, beautiful alloy wheels. Of course, lots of plastic along here to keep all our stones off of the vehicle. Here, I love all of that chrome accent around the windows. Looks great. Here, you even have luggage racks to haul that clapped out couch to the dumpster. How about over here? You have that nice little overhang. Love the looks. Overall, I think Subaru did a great job with the new style of this vehicle. You've got these great little dual exhaust tips on there on this new Ascent. Of course, like the overall looks of it. Looks fairly large and in charge. Great looking vehicle, but there are some problems. The tailgate lamps sometimes aren't working with these vehicles. Sadly, even a lot of customers are noticing extreme battery draw. Even when the vehicle's not being used and it's just parked in a parking lot like this, it often starts to suck down the battery and leave the vehicle dead. If you come out after a few days, you may find it may not want to restart. What other issues? Well, we have this upgraded, expensive option right here called EyeSight. You'll see those two little eyes peeping out there. That can fail, and often they aren't working all that well. That's problematic. Another issue is cracked windshields. Not entirely sure why, but we're finding a lot of windshields are cracking prematurely for no reason, and they're just going split without even a rock touching them. Oddly enough, that is a problem. Could be a structural integrity issue, as well as we talk about the fuel pump, the Denso fuel pump, which can start to distort and prevent fuel from accurately getting to the engine, and of course then you're having running issues. Problematic to say the least. So if you want something that's a little more reliable and you still want sort of that Japanese dependability, then I would suggest looking at a Toyota Highlander. It's going to be much more better bang for your buck, and guaranteed you won't see half the problems that you're seeing with these new Subaru Ascents. GM has had a whole host of issues with engines that you'll find equipped in some of these SUVs and other vehicles. As you see, we've got the Chevy there, and you got the old school taillights, Chevy logo there, and this one here is a Traverse LTZ. It's a clearly fairly large size SUV. You can also find that engine packaged in the Acadia, the Enclave, as well as a Cadillac XT6. And that's essentially the earlier generation 3.6 liter V6 VVT, so the variable valve timing system is not a great engine. I mean, yes, it makes good performance. Yes, it's great for economy, but unfortunately, a lot of transmission failures outright associated with that engine, sudden acceleration loss to the point where you're putting the throttle down and the vehicle just won't run. And Car Wizard also confirms that these engines have a problem because it doesn't begin and end with sudden acceleration issues. It's also reliability, coolant, oil loss, and of course the bigger problem is what's right down into the front here, and it's called the timing chain and the chain guides. And the chain guides break or slip, and basically you have a timing chain that slips a cog. If that happens, what do you think's gonna happen? Piston valve collision, and that's all over but the crying. It's not a great generational engine. It has the potential on paper. Some people love them and some people get away scot-free, but unfortunately that early generation 3.6 liter GM motor is not necessarily one that's going to last over 60,000 miles. Let's just dive right into some large luxury SUVs SUVs that are chocked full of all kinds of catastrophic issues. Whether we're looking at a Cadillac Escalade like this that's known with some of the 8-speed automatic transmissions with brutal drivability, or the engines on the 6.2s with broken lifters, or all the other issues like handles that basically rip right off in your hand, or the fact that there's way less room in the back than you should be, or you get premature chassis rust in there, or the fact that you get all kinds of other infotainment, electrical issues. And the fact that you have to be a funeral director's owner to drive one of these vehicles and push everybody else out of the way as you bear down on them, tailgating and pushing them out of your way. The Cadillac Escalade just leads the list of many other brutally unreliable, catastrophically failing full-size luxury SUVs. And number 8 SUV that literally is one of those that I can't recommend unless you really need to have a Tesla. What we're looking at here is a Tesla Model X. How do you tell that? Well, primarily because you see the door handles are front to back like that. That's how you tell directly, and it's slightly larger. Some would consider it an SUV, some wouldn't, but I do because of its overall versatility. You have lots of seating capacity, seats in the front, seats here, and potentially in the back. You have lots of arrangement. What we actually have here is a Tesla Model X Plaid, and you can see this is the 1,000 horsepower unit. So clearly this is one of those vehicles, if you need to have it and you want that power, there's really nowhere else to get 1,000 horsepower at this kind of price point. So this is clearly what you want. But if you don't need that 1,000 horsepower, I would ask that you probably consider or reconsider buying one of these vehicles because of all of the issues that you can associate with a modern day Tesla Model X. They're the most upscale SUV on their marketplace. I mean, they look very intriguing. That's why people are buying them. This is the latest generation. They gave up the pitchfork style vent on there. This is the more update, looks great. Beautiful, clean front spoiler right there. And of course, I love that headlight. Very fresh and feisty. Beautiful, everything's clean. This looks like an Apple store on wheels right here. Cameras on board allow you to monitor this consistently. Of course, you have these fold-away mirrors and this massive glass panel. As you see, it runs all the way up and over. So that is a spot that if you're driving on roads that have a lot of gravel and rock like that, that's a risk that you're gonna break that window. That is one reason why you either need massive insurance or skip this model altogether. But what are some of the issues other than some of the quality control problems you would expect? And yes, quality control problems there are. I actually had the experience last year of doing a review, test drive, full drive of one of these beautiful Tesla Model X Plaids like this, and it is breathtaking. It will suck the wind right out of you and hold it out of you. But unfortunately, there are some problems, and some of the things I would experience and I've seen are related to fit and finish. Sometimes these door handles aren't always flush, or sometimes one's in, one's more out. Of course, even fit and finish, you look right here, this doesn't really lay, it doesn't fit flushly, and actually there's a little bit of offset. That side looks okay. This side is actually up quite a bit. As you can see, this side here actually sits higher on the door panel rather than this side. So clearly, that is typically an issue. Of course, yes, you have the great Tesla badging all over the place, but this is also a spot where I saw lots of that mismatched paneling. Was once those Falcon doors opened and then reclosed, that is an area that you would expect. So paint, finish issues, panel alignment, lots of those quality control QC issues that you would expect in a lot of these vehicles. But there's much more to this equation than just a few body panels as well as poor paint finish. Number one, very difficult to tow it if the vehicle's dead. Number two, there have been cases where some of the batteries have ignited in many of these cars, and it's very difficult for the emergency responders to actually put the fire out. And that is a part of the issue, is that a lot of these batteries have failed prematurely. If they go and you need to do a full set of batteries, expect $20,000 to $25,000 for a full set. That in itself is enough to deter a lot of people from buying these particular SUVs. In lots of cases with autopilot issues, it doesn't work on some vehicles, other vehicles it does. The power steering has been known to be a problem for some of these. And sadly, electrics have been a big problem for a lot of customers. Some people, doors are a problem, some people they're not. Autopilot, a lot of electrics in general have been the problem. The other big issue is you have that central screen in the dashboard, and the big issue there is that that controls everything. Without that screen, this thing is dead in the water. And I actually had a Tesla Model 3 earlier this year, and I got in one day and it wouldn't restart. The dash didn't come on. That actual center screen did not illuminate, meaning I was stuck, done. I couldn't go anywhere. The battery wasn't dead, I just couldn't go anywhere. I had to close, unlock, lock, tried a few things, stepped away, messed around with it a little bit, and then finally it came on. I don't know if it was going through a reboot or what. That's clearly a problem. It's not reliable. You could go into it one day thinking I'm just driving home and it just won't start because the center screen doesn't light up. And a couple other things to note is you can get ghosting effects. You can get that sun glare because that glass goes all the way up. And it has this puny little visor that actually does help to keep some of the sunlight out, but there's been lots of people with problems because the sun's coming in actually above you as well. One big issue to note as well, sudden acceleration. Could you imagine having 1,000 horsepower on tap and the car decides to launch by itself? Yikes, that sounds like a mess. Rattly engines, slipping transmissions, expensive air ride suspensions that can fail, death wobble that'll actually keep your vehicle unstable and dangerous at highway speeds, and a heaping pile of other major catastrophic issues ensures that the majority of these Jeep products wind up at the bottom of the barrel for overall reliability. We're clearly looking at the Wrangler right here. Clearly we know that there's a lot of issues. We have water ingress, big problems. Water gets in, shorts out electrics. Tip them, totally integrated power module that can fault out. That affects all your electrics, your lights, your mirrors, your windows. And if that fails, it might even be a fail to run to start. Fuel pumps fed off of there as well. Coolant leaks, you have throttle position sensor issues, and under here, you can get death wobble under there because that suspension parts wear out. And then that vehicle can become just a downright unstable, ornery, and a little awkward. Quite dangerous, actually. Vehicles like this glorious tank on wheels, we have the Wagoneer. And it's their big granddaddy. They're trying to compete with all the largest full-size SUVs on the market. But there's issues, a lot of people complaining. Some people saying, hey, they enjoy theirs. Other people saying they're losing all their pixels on their display. They're having infotainment system issues, technology problems, accident avoidance position issues, transmission shifting problems, but specifically the big one seems to be a rattly engine on startup, which often sounds like the old Hemi rattle in some cases. Some people say it goes away in short order, as some people say it hangs around for a while. It does not inspire confidence, and a new vehicle that costs as much as this in 6 figures should not do that. So the next unreliable heap is this unit right behind me here. Yeah, in fact, this is hybrid, and in fact, it has a 4-cylinder engine, and in fact, it's going to cost you a lot of money to continually maintain over the years. Well, this is actually a... Whoops. No, that's not it. It's actually a Volvo. Like we have right here. This is a Volvo. This is one of those models that clearly can and will cost you money in the long run. Now, yes, it's a very elegant design. Beautiful headlights in these latest Volvos. Very stout looking front end. Beautiful high gloss finishing there, as well as in the front bottom lip. Beautiful wheels, laser cut in fact, as well as some great styling detail along the side of these vehicles. Gotta love these lines. A lot of great detail and efforts put into the looks of these vehicles. Of course, you have these vertical lights, beautiful. And of course, we have this little roof rack here to haul that garbage over to the dump. And we do have some nice finishing touches like piano gloss black finishing there, as well as throughout the grille. And what about the inside? The interior is absolutely beautiful with these interesting bolstered seats. Of course, different textures and combination of materials makes it very interesting. High quality finishing makes this vehicle feel as quality as a modern day Audi. You have these fake tailpipes, both sides right there. You actually hide them out of sight, out of mind. Big glass on top, very interesting there. And just a whole plethora of different technologies buried in this vehicle. But what are some of the issues, and why is this vehicle not worth buying because of its reliability issues? Well, it is Euro, so it's going to cost you more money anyway, but there's actually a lot of problems. Like over here, brakes, for example. They prematurely wear. The brakes aren't all that large, and of course, because the weight of this vehicle means that a lot of times these brakes prematurely wear, and you're going to have a situation with warped brake rotors, and you're going to have to change them well in advance. Unfortunately, it's not just that. The tire pressure monitoring system, which isn't buried in there, like a lot of modern day vehicles, the sensors are actually in the rim. Here they're not. So in this case, the ABS sensors actually detect the rolling resistance and as well as the rolling diameter to detect whether you have lower air in that wheel. They're much more prone to false positives, and as a result, you're getting much more activation on the dashboard, which becomes a pain because you're questioning how right that actually is or the integrity of the system. There's some vibration issues with some of these vehicles in the wheels because they use a sound deadening foam within the tire system as well to reduce sound and rolling resistance noise that you would typically get ripping down the highway, and sometimes it breaks loose, causes vibration. And that's just one of many things that could cause vibration. Other things, ball joints, balanced wheels, axles, and many, many more issues. But it's a lot of the technology that does become problematic. As well, we talk about the infotainment system in the center of the dashboard, and usually it becomes a problem on top of a problem, means multiple upgrades firmware updates just to keep it right, just so you don't have problems and glitches. So a lot of electrics, a lot of the electronic innovations are what keeps this vehicle slightly problematic and results in many trips to the dealer. But the biggest thing is the innovation that takes this thing down, because Consumers Reports actually ranks this quite low just because of its natural history. One thing that stands out to me is the engine and the drivetrain. That's the big thing. Innovation. Why on earth would you want to have a 4-cylinder engine, a hybrid, but not only a supercharger strapped on and a turbocharger strapped onto it? Yes, they're trying to get that zero turbo lag, but they're also trying to get that turbo power for top end. A lot of boost pressure into the engine, resulting in potential much more harm and strain on that drivetrain in the long run. Now as well, because of that, what they're finding is some engines as little as 50,000 miles and you're getting heavy oil consumption, and that a lot of times had to do with the piston rings and the very design. And later models were updated, but unfortunately if you had a model and you ran out of warranty, you could be on the losing end of paying for some major engine repairs, and that's just not acceptable. Think about it, you hit 60, 70, 80,000 miles, your warranty runs out, and all of a sudden you're having to do a rebuild or possibly top up your oil quart every 500 miles. That's not good, but that's a result, and that's truly why it's all the innovation, technology, and engine reliability or durability is why I truly can't suggest a Volvo XC60. Instead of the Volvo, I would likely recommend a vehicle like the Acura RDX right here. You're likely going to have just as much fun driving it and likely less problems. Just when you thought some of the older ones were the problem areas, well, what we have here is a 2020 rolling turd. Not sure how this ever came to be. As a matter of fact, look in NHTSA, National Highway Transportation Safety Administration. What they do is define the complaints by customers. They also log all of the recalls of every manufacturer. And did you realize that this particular model has logged approximately 28 recalls thus far? Recalls are safety items, issues that could cause a safety implication to the driver. It's a sad state of affairs. Now, granted, this is a great looking Benz. Don't get me wrong. First time I saw this newer generation, I was blown away. I thought it was a great looking unit. Of course, this one here has some great little vents right there, and it's gorgeous wheels, of course, red calipers, lots of running gear. That looks great. Look, it's a twin turbo V8 engine, big calipers and tires. Of course, naturally right here we have the big 3-pointed star. So this SUV is bold as can be. Gorgeous looking unit, oversized wheels. You've got AMG badging everywhere. Probably the nicest interior this side of a Range Rover right now. Big roof racks on top. And what we're looking at here is a GLE right there, 63S. Has a set of quad tips, and it's a gorgeous looking unit, absolutely. So that is first why people are buying them. Where should we start here, folks? Windshield wipers stop working randomly and just go out completely. Usually some relay or fusing issue. Headlights right there, often another issue. These headlights stop working or intermittently, or as well you're gonna have an issue with the actual brightness, and they do tend to run a little bit lower beam. Fuel. You have fuel leaks right there. Underneath you've got the tank, and of course sometimes there's been comments of people having fuel leaks or fuel pouring out causing a potential fire or a risk of fire. In many cases as well, corrosion is noted, so corrosion on body panels, but more importantly, corrosion underneath the chassis. So chassis corrosion, where you're finding all kinds of corrosion and rust on the frame parts and components. That is a weakness right there. There's also been codes with faulty drivetrain systems and malfunctions, usually result in check engine lights. We also can't forget about some of the general wear and tear items that just don't hold up all that well. Body panels, like this, these can stop working. Seat belts have actually been noted to be a problem. Fitment panels, where panels crack loose and some of the connections to those panels don't hold up all that well. Body panels that start dropping from their main frame and the connection points just start to snap. There's too many plastic fittings holding everything together. So the Mercedes GLE is a great technology, has lots of style, design elements, great performance options in these vehicles. The sad reality is, as we transition into a place of quick manufacturing efficiencies, means that there's more plastic fittings, means that there's quicker adjustments. People are finding shortcuts at the manufacturing level, and cheaper materials for cost cutting often means that some of these vehicles are getting cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And try to compare a brand new Mercedes like this to an old school 190E. Not a chance, not even close. What about the F-Pace? Sadly, these vehicles come with their share of problems. Underneath here, of course, you do get a crankshaft that goes from your engine and your transmission, of course, to drive the rear wheels. Crankshaft is too short and the bolts have been known to shear. As well as the engine itself, crankshaft pulley bolt, too short, too weak, and they have been known to fracture. CO2 emissions due to programming that wasn't quite dialed in on some of these vehicles as well. Infotainment system on the screen, and I personally had this, and you get a SIM card that you actually have to plug in there, and they've been known as well to just crash and burn, and then you have to basically take the vehicle in for further diagnostics. They send away. It took 2 weeks to get my SIM card replaced in my Jag F-Type, and it still never worked properly ever since. So clearly infotainment systems and some of the electronics are issues with some of these. Coolant problems, of course, coolant issues. You can get the infamous Y-pipe on certain engines, the V6, the V8s, and the SVR, and they can puke coolant all over, oil leaks. And transmissions generally aren't bad in most of the modern day Jags. Everybody gives them a hard time. But most modern day Jags are rocking the ZF 8-speed automatic. It can be a little abrupt, it can be a little aggressive, but it's generally pretty robust and it knows what the driver wants to do. So generally speaking, from a fun perspective and a unique driving opportunity, the Jaguars are amazing. From a pure reliability and problems that you can avoid, definitely Jaguar is going to be one of the worst vehicles for reliability based on consumers' reports and even from my own personal experience. Everybody said, get the V8, you need lots of power. The V8 has power to pull. The V8 sounds great, it's amazing. Well, let's talk about it because it's not quite so amazing in this particular generation of a BMW. The engine you find in this vehicle obviously isn't more than enough to get it going along. Obviously BMW and the traditional trademark grills as well as those angel eyes make this car very desirable in a lot of circles. Unfortunately, the engine that you find when you're associating it with the X5 50i is where you have some of the issues, because when we're talking about that, that generally means engines that are identified within the 2008 to 2012 model years that have that 50i designation and don't begin and end with just the X5. You can also find them in 5 Series and 7 Series cars, and that is the wonderful BMW N63, one of the early generations. Now, they have gotten a lot better, but this first generation of that V8 is absolutely breathtakingly ruthless. And why is that? And what's actually going on with that type of engine? Let me explain. First of all, we won't even talk about that generation of vehicle anyway, with some of the other problems with electrics, air ride suspension that drops because the airbags start to let air out. Most of the issues are related to that engine when we're talking about the 50 Series. It's that hot V, because it's a V8. In the channel, they've decided to put 2 turbos in there, and those 2 turbos generate a lot of heat because exhaust temperatures make excessive heat. It gets glowing hot, and that glowing hot heat actually starts to melt out parts within that V of the engine. Of course, it takes a toll on gaskets, so you get leaks, both coolant, oil leaks, wiring, plastics, all of the other parts. Great, some of that's cosmetic, some of it's coolant leaks. Of course, you do get coolant leaks because that's one of the problems, water pumps, thermostats. The other issue is because those leaks, you end up with a situation that results in excessive oil consumption because you end up with the valve guide seals that guide the valves and keep the oil below the engine. Those start to melt too, unfortunately, because of all that exhaust temp heat, and then you wind up eating lots of oil. These are oil eater 9000s, unfortunately. So then you have a heavy oil consumption coupled with the fact that BMW said BMW Care, they were going to try to take care of some of the customers. Allegedly, that was really just moving people along to try to coach them and basically say, hey, look, we'll try to take care of it as best we can. It does ultimately often mean new rebuilds or engine top ends, but there's a lot of problems with that. There's also excessive battery draw, just has to do with that vehicle in general. But related to the engine, you do also have other big issues. For example, fuel injectors. They say leaking injectors are one of the big problems here with that engine as well. And because of that, what ends up happening, the fuel winds up going down into the cylinders, leaking down. It doesn't necessarily leak externally, it leaks internally, and then you wind up with washing of the cylinders. If you wash your cylinders, that takes away the oil film. No oil film, move that cylinder, it starts to scratch the internals. You get the rest, right? So the engine becomes toast in a very short period of time if you end up losing injectors. Another big issue is the timing chains. Timing chains on these vehicles, that keeps the pistons and the valves in synchronization, so you bring in fuel, exhaust, and spark and all that good stuff. If that synchronization goes out of whack, you basically can wind up with piston and valve connection and catastrophic boom, and then your engine's toast again. So that's another big issue because those timing chains would stretch, or sometimes the ramps would break and let go, and then you'd skip a cog. So clearly it was a bad design right from the get-go. I guess fundamentally it was a great design. In practice and execution, not so much. Instead, if you really have to have this generation of BMW, it also doesn't come without its issues. But for example, Or you go with one of these particular vehicles. It's the 35D. Yes, you can have still some of the airbag issues, and you do have their own sets of problems, but the engine fundamentally is very solid on one condition. You do the full EGR, DPF delete on that vehicle, then you have a fundamental engine that's strong, good for a lot of miles. I had one, and the only place that kept dying was on the DPF heater system, EGR, and all of that plugging off. Get rid of all of that, do a full delete, and that engine's good for a lot of miles. Ours was at 140,000 miles when I sold it, and the gentleman who took it before was going full delete, and now he's good probably for another 200,000 miles. So if you need to have that generation, go deleted X5 diesel. If a car maker was ever able to make wires leak oil, or an exhaust system blow a rear bearing, or have body panels literally fall off, from my experience, Range Rover is definitely that manufacturer that is going to have the best fighting chance at doing all of the above. Unfortunately, these vehicles are not that reliable, and even though they've reached into the BMW grad bag of goodies for drivetrains, they have had their host of issues with all kinds of coolant leaks, O2 sensor leaks, transmission issues, brakes locking up and seizing because they're electric, air ride suspension problems sagging, strange noises coming from under the hood, leaks, coolant, oil, and everything above. Electrical technology overload in these vehicles creates all kinds of sorts of issues that you wouldn't even dream of that could possibly happen. And sadly enough, even a simple thing as a door handle can lock up and cost you thousands of dollars in these vehicles. And unless you earn the salary of King of England as well, I would suggest don't even want to try one of these outside of warranty. They will literally put you in the poorhouse. The Range Rover and Range Rover Sport, definitely ones for the ultra mega rich. And have you been looking for small SUVs in the luxury car segment? Well, Range Rover often fits a lot of that criteria as well. A lot of people are looking for something smaller, luxurious, and Range Rover, Land Rover products often hit the mark. But sadly, when we're looking at Land Rover Discovery products, like you'll notice right there, you do get a lot of the great luxury amenities, but you also get to take on the burden of owning one of the most unreliable vehicles on the market. From the Ingenium engine, blowing coolant lines, rattling timing chains, electrics that constantly keep you guessing. When you sign on the dotted line and buy yourself a Discovery, it's highly recommended that you invest in a full-time mechanic to stay on board, just to keep you riding around, to keep that vehicle on the road. But anyway, let's get into the list of some of the mid-size SUVs in the luxury car segment that are absolute trash. Another one definitely makes the mark for one of the most unreliable late model Mercedes-Benz is this little SUV right here. There's all kinds of problems. Well, let's start with the e-call system. Problems with that, no doubt about it. Faulty airbag systems on these vehicles. Of course, you get the little light illuminated, as well as the power cable that runs the main power cable from the battery to keep the rest of the system powered up and energized has been a problem with intermittent connections and trouble areas. Of course, you also have big issues with premature tire wear on some of these vehicles, and if you actually opt up for the off-road package, there's an optional air ride suspension. Now, this vehicle was obviously checked in by a customer that was saying, hey, my vehicle is sitting lower than it normally should be. So they drove it into the dealer questioned, yeah, I don't know about that. So what they did was they went and put this tape marks on here. When the vehicle rolled in, this tape was actually fully slacked up. It was tight because they stick it here and then they stick it there and then it sits tight. But then if you look over here, you'll notice this was tight, this is tight, but now look at this, loose. All that. In other words, you can tell the vehicle's sitting on its rump. So the air ride self-leveling suspension is actually shot on this vehicle. And that is another typical failure point. Another issue is some of the plastics, the door handles ripping off. I personally own a C300 of the same generation, and the actual speaker in the door popped right out of the panel. Yes, as well as the rocker panels on the sides popped off. Two things simultaneously when I hit a set of railroad tracks that weren't even that aggressive, and the vehicle started popping off. 30,000 kilometers on the clock, and the vehicle started coming apart. Now remember, the G300 here is a very similar generational vehicle, and yeah, fundamentally it's a simple vehicle from a luxury standpoint, but in the Mercedes world it is a little bit of a downgrade. You do have these great tail lights and of course beautiful little exhaust tips there, and what we're talking about is a GLC 300, and it is 4MATIC, so people love them because they're all-wheel drive. But we can't also forget to mention that there's that engine under the hood. It's a French-derived little hot rod. It's a 2-liter turbocharged 4 that makes about 240 and change, and the problem is with that, there's been cases where people using pure fueling, not adequate oil servicing, and of course just in general there's been issues with them popping holes in the pistons. Have you ever heard of that issue? Yes, holed pistons. In other words, all of a sudden, poof, big blue smoke out the back and your engine's done. That has been a common issue with several of these vehicles, noted all over the internet. So unfortunately, GLC 300 fundamentally seems like a reliable package, and it's easy to own because it's not the one most expensive vehicle. It's not an S-Class where it's going to cost you a ton, but the problem is it's not all that reliable, the GLC 300. And another vehicle in the Mercedes world. So the second vehicle on my list that's literally one of those I would recommend staying away and run as far as you can is what we're looking at back here. And what we're talking about is actually a Buick Encore. And while they are a very small, compact little SUV, they do offer economy, fun, frivolous little driving experience, and certainly an interesting styling perspective. I mean, they do bring these LED taillights to the game on these Buicks. What we're looking at here is an all-wheel drive CX version. They do have some nice touches at the bottom here as well. Some fake vents, certainly no exhaust tips there to note. They also have some nice flares, a very attractive little vehicle with some styling details, a roof rack that can haul your bedbug infested mattress to the dumpster, and of course even great mirrors with dual tone door handles with soft touch access. The interior also looks quite stylish and very cute, has all the most up-to-date and styling detail like brushed aluminum and chrome detail. But interestingly enough, they don't necessarily rank all that well. Yes, Repair Pal gives them a 4 out of 5, which is questionable, but that's only because they haven't been out a ton of time yet, and also because they're a relatively low-cost, entry-level price point type vehicle, so the annual service costs are only about $468. But because they have such a questionable and wide array of failures, I would definitely consider these relatively unreliable, and because they're based on a GM product, while parts are low in cost, I would anticipate the frequency of failures and the potential severity of the failures. What kind of problems can you expect? Well, some issues are based on the engine. There's many people that have noted that sometimes you can expect sometimes stalling from some of these engines, or in fact, smoke out of the exhaust, hesitation, and in the worst case, you can actually anticipate an actual catastrophic engine fire. Yes, that's right. There are some of these vehicles that are known to actually ignite. Very, very scary moment indeed when you're driving one of these vehicles. On top of that, turbochargers, which drive and produce more power by injecting additional pressure into the engine, have been another known failure component within some of these vehicles. And to note, many problems related to braking issues, surging, pulsating, or replacement required. They are relatively small brakes, as you can see, very small calipers, but they are known to fail, and prematurely, they're quite a conversation piece on these vehicles. There's also talks about defective safety equipment, airbags, and some of the sensors on these vehicles have also produced some of the issues. And a lot of GMs seem to have that issue. Cadillac, we know, is another GM product that has that ring around the airbag system on the steering wheel that has been a problem, as well as some of the pedestrian warning systems. Problematic to say the least. Climate control related issues inside, as well transmission issues. In some cases, delayed shifting, delay engagement, grinding, sudden acceleration, where it just delays and then goes. And unfortunately, we know that GM has had a lot of problems with transmissions lately. You don't have to look very far to know that it also happens in pickup trucks. So while some reviewers consider these somewhat reliable, that's only because when something breaks, the costs of parts are quite low. The bottom line is, it's a price point vehicle, and it's definitely built like one. The Buick Encore is a mess, and if you really wanted a small SUV, I would personally go with a vehicle like a Lexus NX. And a mid-size luxury SUV you should probably avoid for 2025 goes to the Audi product. You get the beautiful calipers and shiny piano gloss finishing along there. This one's an S-line, so you get extra trim upgrades, the big fold-away mirrors, and a big sunroof on top. Beautiful detail on there. And that's why people buy these. They look stylish, but the Q5, even with the LED taillights and the Quattro all-wheel drive system, isn't enough to outcome some of the issues. Sure, you get the fake tailpipes right there, really a lot like Volkswagen, but they just make it look like an exhaust tip, when in actuality, the exhaust system is actually buried under there, and you're actually not even getting a proper outlet right there. But there are some problems with a lot of these Audi products, and the Q5 particularly, where we have the 2.0, the 2-liter TFSI engine that does produce enough horsepower, but unfortunately what's going on with about 80,000 miles, and it doesn't matter, but a lot of their models, it doesn't matter if you're looking at the Q5, Q7, and even some of the A-series, A5, A6s, a lot of them are using that same engine, and it's the 2-liter TFSI engine that's heavily known for oil burning. These vehicles are known to consume a lot of oil, PCV issues, oil leaks. carbon fouling, O2 sensors, water pumps, thermostats, cooling line problems. And sure, while the base gearbox and transfer case are fine, the fact remains is there's way too many issues under the hood where a lot of these vehicles, if you're not dealing with water ingress through here or water ingress through the top or water ingress through here, you're dealing with electrical gremlins, no start conditions, and a whole host of other challenges with MMI system issues, and power components seem to be a problem that plagues a lot of the VAG products from Volkswagen and Audi, unfortunately. As a matter of fact, the electrical troubles got so bad that carried over to the e-tron. Of course, we know those are pure EVs, and that was a big part of the issue, but electric gremlins were the challenge. And many people that I've spoke to said by the time you hit 60, 70, 80,000 miles, many people find themselves burning a quart of oil every 400, 500, 600 miles, which is far too much. And about $12 to $15 a quart, that gets not only expensive, but when you're burning oil, that is sludging up inside the engine, and that's causing other problems which can exacerbate premature failures. We're also talking about mechanical issues with suspension troubles on a lot of these vehicles, brake wear, and quite frankly, it's like many Audis that I often recommend. If you're going to buy any, get the upscale engines, the V6s, and sometimes even the best engine they've ever made was that 2.5 liter turbocharged hot rod engine that you find in the RS3. That's one of the few engines that Audi actually makes that's worth holding on to. Very attractive vehicle for the most part. It actually looks quite sporty, looks sharp. I see it has a 2-liter turbo engine, all-wheel drive. Very nice vehicle for the most part. However, don't let those fancy little BS tailpipes confuse you. This vehicle is actually chocked full of problems. You want to get into some problems and lists of what this vehicle is good for or not? How about transmission-related issues with these vehicles? How about slipping between gears 3 and 4? There was actually a service bulletin as well, TSB 19-2103, which was related to tranny issues. As well as it jerks, and it basically is just a little rough and sloppy at low speed. Not a very good setup for the transmission. As well as when you put it from reverse to forward, you get a clunk, and then that's not good. That sounds very awe-inspiring. There's also electronic issues with these vehicles. You want to start there? How about the wireless charging system doesn't go off and it can actually burn out your phone? How about the instrument cluster inside there on the dashboard? That is problematic as well, where it just turns right off and goes black or dark altogether. That's not a good situation either. How about other general glitches like blind spot monitoring, the backup camera, which is also a problem and stops working, hill assist, which is also a problem for this vehicle at times, and basically really almost any other electrical glitch that you can imagine, this thing has actually seen it at some point. These vehicles are not recommended, highly unreliable, and quite frankly, I would leave this one in the dust. And right over here, we have the next category, which we're talking about more or less the off-road SUVs. Now, those are restricted to a few small different model types, but specifically the Ford Bronco, the Jeep Wrangler, and there's a few others that make the list. But unfortunately, many of them are built like junk and they won't last 100,000 miles. The Ford, for example, with cam phaser issues, of course, they've drop-in valves on the 3-liter engines, and as well as the 2.7s. There's no shortage of troubles even with the Ford Bronco, even though it's brand new. Let's dive right in to look at some of the worst off-road SUVs. See this little SUV right here. This is one clearly not known for reliability. Nobody's ever going to say these are durable or reliable. They are in fact somewhat popular because a lot of youthful buyers love these for their style, their look. Let's take a closer look and understand first of all why people are even buying these vehicles, because they are in fact quite unreliable. What we're looking at here, clearly an off-roading type vehicle. You have a big lift right there. You can see pretty extensive ride height there. You have big tires, very easy access to a spare, which allows you to change a spare roadside, or if you happen to have an issue on the trail, you can change it there too. People love them because very rugged, lots of hard wearing parts. Hit some trees and brush with this, it won't break. Of course, even there you won't bend your rocker panel because you have extra protection right there. More protection, simple access, more hard, easy wear in plastics, lots of hard wearing pieces that are definitely going to take the abuse. Of course, you have big suspension parts there that are going to help you with articulation, get you climbing up rocks and shrubs and all kinds of other elevations. Of course, you have lots of other great parts like this, big bumpers, solid. You can tow your buddies out of the mud with this rig. Of course, they do have these beautiful eyeball headlights and the typical Tonka toy look, what we're looking at right there. As well, Nice, these flip ups, and this flips up. And of course you have these great little lifts here. Some cool new updates on this particular model. We're looking at is a Rubicon, which means it's got a lockable front hub, and this vehicle's very, very capable. You can also even take the roof off here and make it into a bit of a convertible. The doors pop off, the window folds down. It's very versatile all the way around. Inside is quite poorly made and very basic and cheap, but people like them nonetheless. What kind of issues can you expect? Number one, look up there. Water ingress. Of course, you've got those seals up here. They often let water in, and of course, because the roof is meant to come on and off, often sometimes things get pinched or they wear out, and you wind up filling that cabin like a fishbowl just because you let so much water in there. That's one common problem. Another issue is the intake sensors. You can get hunting and surging and uneven idle, problems with drivability related there, transmission issues. As well, another key issue with these, when you look inside there, the gauges and the lights sometimes come and go, and power windows come and go, and a lot of other random electrical failures because of what they call the TIPM, the totally integrated power module, which basically is the central module that allows all the electrics to go in and out of it. When that TIPM fails, often a lot of your electrics come, they go, they fail, they don't, and that TIPM is often quite expensive to repair and replace. With a lot of the Jeep products, you will find that to be an issue. As well, another common problem with these is the infamous loose suspension system. Of course, as you look underneath here, you get a lot of very off-road capable equipment underneath there, but sadly, that just means that there's more capability for it to work its way loose. I mean, look at the long springs and the big articulation you can get. What do you think that translates to? Well, once you get to the point where bushings and tie rods and all those other parts start to wear, because this vehicle is already intended to be loose and flexible for the elevation to be able to climb rocks and stumps, obviously things just get 10 times worse than your garden variety vehicle. So then you get what they call a death wobble. The vehicle becomes grossly unstable, can barely keep it between the lanes once you get these vehicles with some miles on them, and you get up to that 100,000 miles or so. Repair Pal rates these at about 3.5 out of 5, which isn't all that solid. They also say that you can expect an annual service almost $700 a year just to keep these on the road. And while the unexpected incidence of major repairs is only 0.3 per year, basically every 2 or 3 years you would expect something more major. The problem is when it does become a major issue, it's much greater than most other vehicles in its marketplace. Of course, these you can expect 16 to 17% of those failures to be significant and large in value and cost. So they're quite pricey, and when they fail and when they break, it's not an inexpensive proposition. But the other hand, if you really need to have one of these vehicles, buy one brand new. Don't buy one used, because they are a problem when you start wearing parts out. Buying them new just means that you can buy it, drive it for 3, 4, 5 years, flip it, and then basically get 80 or 90% of its original value back at the turn of a hat. So you barely lose anything, and the additional benefit of having a warranty means that buying it new could be a decent proposition, but know that sadly it will likely still hit the shop unexpectedly for some pricey repairs. The fourth SUV on the list is this little red unit right here. Not great. Hyundai. And as well, as you can see, the birds don't really like this vehicle all that much either. This is a blue drive, of course, some great mirrors. Of course, you have this wonderful little tail lights, and we're talking about a Kona by Hyundai right there. This one's electric, but it's the gas job that we're talking about specifically that is the problem. Firstly, I should mention there's some caveats with this vehicle, because vehicles like this, typically, if you don't have one of the big problems, then you're usually pretty good. And as a result, Repair Pal actually ranks it 4 out of 5 for overall reliability. Consumers Reports, on the other hand, basically predicts it to be much lower than average reliability. So there's a bit of a conflict there, but I'll tell you this much for free, there's a lot of big problems. One of the issues here is early battery deterioration and drain. Another issue is down under there, you can't see it because it's an electric version, but the gas job, high oil consumption. It has to do with the piston rings in the engine, obviously not built for right tolerances, and letting oil pass, creating additional oil consumption. That's a big issue here. Forward collision avoidance right there has been noted to be a major issue here, as a whole plethora of other electrical gremlins throughout these vehicles. And some of those electrical problems are a result of battery draw, battery drain, and as well, of course, some of that has caused the prevalence of some of the sensing systems and protective systems to not function properly. Airbags, another issue you can expect, and there's a real big problem with some of these. NHTSA has recognized that there's a lot of problems related to the engine. And unfortunately, if you're one of those unlucky customers that lands with one of these problem engines that Hyundai and Kia has had over the last few years, then you can recognize. You may have high oil consumption, engine noises, ticking, knocking. You might even get a check engine light. The big one, of course, is if you actually get an engine stalling because an engine fails. You may actually have piston rings that break, or unfortunately even worse, some of the machining process meant that a lot of the oil filings wound up in the cooling surfaces, prevented the bottom end of the engine, the rod bearings, from getting oil. It would starve it, they would overheat and potentially fail. And unfortunately they'd fail roadside, burning, with the fire department having to show up because it has been that much of a problem. Allegedly, Hyundai and Kia have been a little slow on the uptake to actually get some of those problems rectified and identified. Fortunately, there was a whistleblower internally that came forward and said that there's an intentional delay, and as a result now Hyundai and Kia are putting their best foot forward to try to fix some of these problems. Unfortunately, it has negatively impacted a lot of people. As a result, I personally would never ever even consider buying these ones. They are a drastic risk because of transmission, engine, electrics. Just not worth the hassle. And number 5 on the list of vehicles I could not recommend, and they're absolutely horrible because of reliability issues. What we're looking at is another Jeep product. Right here, as you can see, it's a Jeep, and it has these fun little headlights. They also try to simulate those aggressive Tonka toy looks on the front. Fooling nobody. Can't really fake that. You have lots of plastic all over the place, plastic around there, plastic along the rocker panels, plastic around the rear fenders, simulating what you get with a Wrangler, but that's no Wrangler. No, this is junk. It is 4x4 though. Yay. Not similarly equipped like the regular Wranglers, but it does have some great wheels and a great little door handle here with a soft touch access and a cutesy little mirror system. Roof racks to haul your clapped out couch to the dumpster as well. And of course, what we have here, fake, and of course a little more fake inlets right there, but it's a cute vehicle. That's why people are buying them, and they carry that legendary Jeep name. But the Jeep Renegade is just that. It's a renegade. It's ruthless. It's gone rogue for reliability. Lots of problems. Tiger Shark engine, heavy oil consumption, plugs off the systems, the emission systems, then results in poor CO emissions. Yes, you can get a manual gearbox or an automatic. That's been a problem if you go with the auto. Yes, that's also been a big issue. I know some people say, well, some of those transmissions are the ZF automatic transmissions, but regardless, there's still related problems, electrics, wiring harnesses, and the like. Not a great machine. Sadly, with all those problems, you can even expect and anticipate suspension issues, which is the last thing you hope for in a vehicle that's supposedly good for off-roading. Yeah, it looks great. Don't let looks deceive you. And if you want something more durable in this space, maybe buy yourself a Toyota RAV4. That one there is obviously the latest and the greatest Bronco, and of course, it's a Ford product. Lots of controversy around these. They're big, large, bold, and in charge. This isn't the sport version, the smaller. This is the full-size Ford Bronco, and there's a lot of great attributes. A lot of people are buying them. They look very rugged, they look very robust, and that's why people are picking these up. But there's been so many problems. Everybody knows you don't buy the first year of anything, and this is also very much inclusive. And unfortunately, Ford has to go through a lot of teething problems to get some of those issues resolved, and they have some problems indeed. But why are some of the reasons people are even buying these knowing full well that there are issues? Well, I mean, look at the big beefy looking suspension, off-roading capability. You've got very similar to the Jeep, you also have plastic body panels to prevent from scratching and banging. Of course, very rugged looking front bumper with these great little hooks right here, beautiful. And of course a grille that stands out. There's no mistaking this. Ford Bronco looks like nothing much else out there. We have a flip back soft top, and that is one of the issues, is leaks. But there are other issues. Sure, you've got plastic just like the Jeep Wrangler does, and of course more tough handles. The interior looks very beefy and robust, and actually a step up from what you'd see in the Wrangler. You get these great little taillights here, an extra wheel in case you get stuck in the mud or the back 40. Of course, more tow hooks there, and we're dealing with a Bronco. Very impressive looking wheels, and it's just an overall very prominent looking vehicle all the way around. Big bulging hood makes it look especially beefy, and these cool little holy crap hooks right here in case you got to hold on tight. But there have been a few problems, things that just shouldn't happen. For example, some plastic vacuum lines cause drivability running issues, intake manifold gaskets getting sucked into the engine, vibration at speeds because the cardan joint on these vehicles, and of course the biggest issue that a lot of people are talking about, it's on the 2.7 liter eco-junk engines that are basically spitting out or eating up valves. A lot of the valves are getting sucked in. There's already a lot of people talking about the 2.7s failing very early on. As a matter of fact, as little as 2,500 or 3,000 miles. And that's devastating, because imagine if you had one of those that was weak but didn't fail at that early miles, and you drive it long enough to get out of warranty, you could be up the creek with a catastrophic engine failure. I mean, at the end of the day, the valves drop, land in the combustion chamber, and catastrophically blow apart your engine. So at the end of the day, they're fun, frivolous, and yes, they're different than the Jeep Wrangler, and they're different than anything else on the road. But if I can make a recommendation, maybe instead of this, go with the Toyota 4Runner as a better option, or even better, just wait a few years until some of these problems get sorted. And with all of that said, be sure to check out that list. That's my long, comprehensive list of some of the most reliable vehicles. Cars, SUVs, luxury vehicles, performance cars, and the like. You'll love that list. Hope to see each and every one of you on the next one. We'll see you real soon. Bye-bye.